Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine warm sand beneath your feet. The air is dry, but painted gold by a sinking sun. A caravan stretches across the horizon in a slow, deliberate line. Camels sway with patient rhythm. Bundles of silk shimmer like liquid fire in the fading light. You hear bells, soft, measured, almost comforting. This is the image most of us carry when we think of the Silk Road, a romantic highway between East and West, a place where merchants exchanged spices and stories, where cultures met beneath open skies, where silk passed gently from hand to hand, as if history itself moved in elegance. It feels adventurous, it feels noble, it feels safe. But the Silk Road was not safe. If you had stepped onto those routes 2,000 years ago, there is a very real chance you would not survive your first year. Because the Silk Road was never a road. It was a network of exposure. Exposure to heat so intense your thoughts would slow beneath the sun. Exposure to cold so sudden your breath would turn to ice before dawn. Exposure to men who watched from distant ridgelines waiting for caravans to thin. There were no signposts, no permanent borders, no reliable maps. Only memory, rumor, and instinct. You followed the tracks of those who passed before you, hoping they had chosen wisely. Entire caravans disappeared, swallowed by sandstorms that erased footprints in minutes. Others vanished in mountain passes where avalanches fell without warning. Some were taken by disease, parasites in contaminated water, fevers with no name, infections that spread quietly from tent to tent in the night. And yet, despite all of this, people kept walking. They kept loading camels. They kept risking the crossing. Why? Because beneath the danger, something extraordinary was forming. The Silk Road connected worlds that once believed they were alone. Through these fragile threads, across deserts and mountains, ideas began to travel farther than armies. Paper would move west and change how knowledge survived. Gunpowder would follow, altering the balance of power forever. Religions would cross borders that politics could not. Crops would migrate. Languages would borrow. Art would blend. And sometimes death would move with equal efficiency. But before any of that, before paper, before plagues, before prosperity, there was fear. Because the Silk Road did not begin with silk. It began with a military problem. Across the vast grasslands of Central Asia, nomadic riders had perfected a terrifying advantage: speed, mobility, and the ability to strike from a distance while never fully committing to battle. They rode small, resilient horses. They carried compact, powerful recurve bows. They could approach, fire in motion, and disappear before heavy infantry could respond. To settled empires, this was deeply unsettling. Walls meant little against enemies who did not seek to conquer cities but to destabilize supply lines. Armies trained for formation found themselves chasing shadows. And in that imbalance, in that quiet tension between grassland and empire, the foundations of the Silk Road were laid. Because when you cannot defeat a threat directly, you begin to think differently. You begin to ask questions. Who are these people? Where do they trade? What do they value? And how can we use that? The first movements toward the Silk Road were not driven by curiosity. They were driven by strategy, by survival, by the realization that isolation was no longer possible. The world was larger than anyone had imagined, and it was moving, slowly, relentlessly, connected by necessity. The bells of the caravan may sound peaceful now, but beneath them, if you listen carefully, you can still hear the echo of hooves. In 53 BC, on a dry plain near a small desert settlement, a Roman army marched east with confidence. Rome was disciplined. Rome was organized. Rome was certain of its superiority. The legions had conquered across Europe. They had defeated organized states and tribal confederations alike. Formation and endurance were their strengths. But on that plain near Carhae, they faced something different. Mounted archers, riders who refused direct engagement. They approached in waves, released arrows with frightening precision, then retreated beyond the reach of Roman blades. The desert amplified the sound of impact. Metal struck shield. Arrows pierced armor joints. Horses circled endlessly. The Romans could not close the distance. They could not force the decisive battle they preferred. Hour after hour, the sky seemed to rain iron, and Rome learned something deeply uncomfortable. It was not invincible. Far to the east, in another empire, similar concerns were rising. The Han dynasty faced its own nomadic pressure from confederations that moved with equal speed. Raids along the frontier disrupted supply lines. Agricultural settlements felt exposed. The emperor made a decision. If force alone could not stabilize the frontier, perhaps diplomacy could. An envoy was chosen, a man named Zhang. His mission seemed simple on parchment. Travel west, seek alliances, return with intelligence. But the world beyond the frontier did not operate according to imperial plans. Zhang was captured, held for years among the very people his emperor feared. He could have disappeared into history there. Many did, but he survived. He observed, he listened, and eventually he escaped. When he finally returned home, more than a decade later, he carried more than political insight. He brought stories of powerful kingdoms beyond the deserts, of horses larger and stronger than any China possessed, of markets and routes that stretched farther than imagination had allowed. The world suddenly expanded, and when rulers realize the world is larger than they believed, their strategies change. Trade becomes intelligence. Intelligence becomes leverage. Leverage becomes stability. What began as a response to military imbalance slowly transformed into something far greater. Caravans increased. Routes stabilized. Oases became strategic hubs. Middlemen emerged, masters of language and negotiation. Goods rarely traveled the entire distance in a single journey. They moved in segments, hand to hand, region to region. Each exchange added value. Each border added risk. And yet the system held, not because it was peaceful, but because it was necessary. The Silk Road was not built by dreamers alone. It was built by pragmatists, by rulers who feared collapse, by merchants who calculated risk against reward, by communities who understood that connection was more profitable than isolation. Over time, the network thickened. Not a straight line, but a living web. Deserts in the center. Mountains rising like walls. Cities glowing at the edges. From China to the Mediterranean, from India to the steppes, threads intertwined. And something subtle began to happen. The road stopped belonging to any single empire. It became larger than Rome, larger than Han China, larger than any one ruler could fully control. It became a system, and systems once established shape the people inside them. Merchants adapted their diets to foreign goods. Languages absorbed new sounds. Religious ideas traveled quietly in the minds of traders. Even the human immune system, over generations, would be altered by what moved along these paths. But that transformation came at a cost. Because connection does not only spread opportunity, it spreads consequence. And the same roots that carried silk and knowledge would one day carry something invisible, something that would silence cities. But for now, we stand at the beginning. The bells are faint in the distance. The hooves have slowed. A caravan prepares to leave a frontier city. You are not a general. You are not an emperor. You are a merchant. Your survival will depend on judgment, timing, and the willingness to step into uncertainty. The Silk Road does not promise glory. It promises movement. And movement in the ancient world was everything. Take a slow breath. The gates are opening, and the journey is about to begin. Chapter 2. Before silk, there were arrows. Long before silk became a symbol of luxury, the vast grasslands of Central Asia belonged to motion. There were no permanent cities here, no stone walls, no marble forums, only wind, endless, moving wind. The people who lived on these steppes did not build empires of brick. They built empires of mobility. From childhood, they rode. Small, sturdy horses that could survive harsh winters and travel extraordinary distances without complaint. A rider could mount before sunrise and still be moving at dusk. Their wealth was not measured in architecture, but in herds. Horses, sheep, goats, portable wealth. And their most important innovation was not something heavy. It was compact. A recurve bow. Unlike the longbows of Europe, these bows were short enough to use on horseback, yet powerful enough to pierce armor at a distance. The design was elegant. Wood, horn, and sinew laminated together. Flexible. Resilient. A mounted archer could twist in the saddle, release an arrow behind him while retreating, and continue riding without breaking rhythm. To settled empires, this style of warfare felt unpredictable. Infantry relied on formation, on cohesion. But steppe warfare was fluid. It did not seek direct confrontation. It sought exhaustion. You chased. They retreated. You advanced. They dispersed. And when your supply lines thinned, they struck. This imbalance shaped the ancient world more than most textbooks admit. Because when mobility meets bureaucracy, mobility often wins. Along the northern frontiers of Han China, nomadic confederations tested imperial defenses repeatedly. Raids were swift. Grain stores were vulnerable. Border garrisons felt exposed. Walls helped, but only partially. A wall can slow an enemy. It cannot remove them. Meanwhile, far to the west, another great power faced similar frustrations. Rome was expanding eastward, confident, disciplined, certain that its legions could adapt to any terrain. But deserts and open plains did not favor heavy infantry, and Rome would learn that lesson in a way it did not expect. In 53 BC, a Roman general named Crassus marched toward Mesopotamia. He sought glory, wealth, influence equal to his political rivals. His army was formidable. Thousands of trained legionaries, cavalry support, confidence hardened by years of conquest. What he did not fully anticipate was the effectiveness of Parthian cavalry. The Parthians were heirs to steppe traditions. They understood mobility, they understood distance, and they understood patience. When the two forces met near Carrhae, the Romans formed their familiar defensive shapes. Shield walls, tight formations. But the Parthians refused to engage directly. Mounted archers circled from afar. Arrows fell in relentless rhythm. The Romans could not force close combat. They could not pin down an enemy that refused to stand still. Hours passed. Water grew scarce. Shields grew heavy. Confidence eroded. The battle did not end in a dramatic charge. It ended in exhaustion. Roman losses were severe. Crassus himself would not survive the campaign. The defeat at Carrhae echoed loudly across the Mediterranean world. It was not merely a military setback, it was psychological. Rome had encountered a different logic of power. Speed over structure, distance over dominance. And beyond that battlefield lay something larger still. Trade networks already connecting Central Asia to regions far beyond Roman awareness. The Parthians did not simply fight from horseback. they controlled corridors. They taxed movement. They understood that goods, not just armies, moved across deserts. The defeated Karhe did not create the Silk Road, but it revealed something important. The world beyond Rome's frontier was interconnected in ways Rome did not yet grasp. Silk, which had already begun to trickle westward through intermediaries, remained mysterious. Roman elites prized it. They debated its morality. They admired its texture. But they did not fully understand where it came from. Parthian traders were careful. They protected their sources. Information, like silk, was a commodity. And across the steppes, beyond Roman sight, similar calculations were unfolding in the east. Because if Rome had learned it was not invincible, Han China was learning something similar. And when two great empires both recognize vulnerability at roughly the same historical moment, the world begins to shift. The Silk Road did not begin as a celebration of culture. It began as a response to instability. Before silk flowed steadily between civilizations, there were arrows in the sky, and those arrows forced emperors to think beyond their borders. While Rome struggled to understand mobility in the West, Han China faced a quieter but equally persistent pressure along its northern frontier. The Xiongnu Confederation did not seek permanent occupation of Chinese cities. They did not need to. Their power came from disruption. They targeted supply routes. They targeted livestock. They targeted predictability. Agricultural societies depend on stability. Plant in spring, harvest in autumn, store for winter. But nomadic raids fractured that rhythm. Granaries burned, frontier villages emptied, garrisons were stretched thin across long defensive lines. The Han response was initially military. Campaigns were launched, fortifications strengthened, alliances attempted. But steppe warfare was not easily resolved by direct confrontation. Victory required more than force. It required information. Who were these confederations aligned with? Where did their trade networks extend? What resources sustained them? Because here is the deeper truth. The steppe was not isolated wilderness. It was connected. Horses moved between tribes. Metals moved across distances. Textiles and luxury goods traveled through intermediaries. Even before formal diplomatic missions were organized, goods were already passing from hand to hand across Eurasia. Silk, in particular, had begun its quiet migration westward. Not in grand caravans at first, but in fragments. Small quantities exchanged between middlemen, moving in stages. No single merchant traveled the entire distance. Instead, goods advanced like a relay, from China to Central Asian traders, from Central Asians to Parthians, from Parthians toward the Mediterranean. By the time silk reached Roman markets, its origins were distant and obscure. Some Romans believed it grew on trees. Others suspected it was combed from leaves. Few imagined the complex labor behind its production, and fewer still understood the political tensions that shaped its path. Because silk was not simply a luxury, it was leverage. In Han China, silk served as currency and diplomacy. It could be gifted to rival tribes to secure temporary peace. It could be exchanged for horses, stronger, and taller horses from the western regions that were superior for cavalry. Military balance and trade were already intertwined. Meanwhile, Rome's appetite for silk grew. Elite citizens draped themselves in it. Senators debated whether such fabrics weakened moral discipline. Yet demand continued. And where there is demand, roots expand. Empires slowly began to recognize that the lands between them were not empty. They were populated by intermediaries, skilled negotiators, nomadic confederations. Regional powers like the Parthians, who understood something both Rome and Han were beginning to learn. Control of movement was as powerful as control of territory. The Silk Road did not appear overnight. It crystallized gradually from overlapping survival strategies. Han China sought stronger horses and strategic alliances beyond the steppe. Rome sought eastern luxuries and influence over trade corridors. Between them lay deserts, mountains, and political entities who thrived precisely because they stood in the middle. It is tempting to imagine that trade brought peace. But more often, trade was an extension of competition. Routes were negotiated. Tolls were imposed. Information was guarded carefully. A caravan might carry silk in one direction and intelligence in the other. Merchants listened. They observed currency systems. They noted military movements. They memorized safe passages and dangerous ones. Over time, these observations accumulated. Geography became knowledge. Knowledge became power. And the realization dawned: not all power required conquest. Some power required connection. By the late 2nd century BC, Han officials were beginning to look beyond immediate border conflicts. If alliances could be forged farther west, the Xiongnu might be pressured from multiple sides. If stronger horses could be obtained, cavalry tactics could improve. If trade could be stabilized, frontier economies might strengthen. The solution was not merely to defend, it was to reach outward. And so, a decision was made, not to build a road, but to send a man, a diplomat, an observer, someone willing to walk into uncertainty for the sake of knowledge. His name was Zhang, and his journey would transform scattered trade paths into something far more deliberate. Before silk flowed freely across continents, before caravans became predictable, there was a gamble. A single mission into lands barely understood. And from that mission, a network would begin to take shape. Chapter 3. The Man Who Disappeared for 10 Years. When Zhang Qian left the Han court, he did not believe he was stepping into legend. He believed he was stepping into duty. The imperial capital behind him was orderly, structured, predictable. Ceremonial halls, official seals, written mandates. Ahead of him lay uncertainty. His mission, in simple terms, was diplomatic. Travel west. I seek allies. Return with intelligence that might weaken the Xiongnu Confederation pressing against Han borders. But no one could guarantee safe passage. And everyone knew it. To leave the frontier of empire in the 2nd century BC was to accept that you might never be seen again. There would be no messages home, no updates, no reassurance. Only silence. At first, the journey westward was still within familiar terrain: Han garrisons, frontier settlements, watchtowers on distant ridges. But the farther he traveled, the thinner imperial presence became. And then, it disappeared entirely. The land widened, grass replaced cultivated fields. The horizon stretched uninterrupted. Somewhere in that vastness, Zhang Qian was intercepted, captured by the Xiongnu. There was no dramatic last stand, no heroic speech, just containment, removal from his mission. And then, time. Years passed, not weeks, not months, years. For a diplomat raised in courtly structure, and this kind of captivity was not merely physical confinement, it was psychological erosion. He was no longer an envoy, no longer a representative of imperial authority, no longer part of an organized system. He was a man far from home with no certainty of return. At first, there must have been resistance, an internal insistence that this situation was temporary, that rescue might come, that negotiation might occur. But as seasons turned, and no banners appeared on the horizon, hope changes shape. Captivity among nomadic confederations was not necessarily a dungeon. It was absorption. He lived among them, observed their rhythms, their movement patterns, their seasonal migrations, their livestock economy. He would have noticed how decisions were made not in marble halls, but around fires beneath open sky. Authority was not written in ink. It was earned in movement. The Xiongnu were not chaotic raiders as Han propaganda suggested. They were structured differently. Flexible where the Han were rigid, adaptive where the Han were bureaucratic. Over time, Zhang Qian did something remarkable. He learned. He did not simply endure, he studied, he listened. He understood that survival required adaptation, not stubborn resistance. This internal shift is subtle, but crucial. A man sent to observe allies was now observing adversaries from within. And in that prolonged proximity, fear becomes nuance. Nuance becomes comprehension. He saw that the steppe was not empty wilderness. It was connected. Trade passed through it. Goods moved between tribes and distant kingdoms. Metal, textiles, horses. Information traveled faster than expected. Even in captivity, Zhang Qian was mapping mentally. Not just geography, Muisi, but systems. He would have wrestled with doubt. Had the emperor forgotten him? Had his mission already been replaced? Was his sacrifice meaningless? 10 years is long enough to reconsider loyalty, long enough to question identity. But something in him endured. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps curiosity, perhaps the simple refusal to let uncertainty define the end of his story. Eventually, an opportunity emerged, an escape. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just movement. A decision to try. And in that decision, years of quiet observation moved with him. He did not leave the steppe as the same man who entered it. He left with knowledge no one in Han China possessed. Knowledge of Western kingdoms, of powerful horses bred in regions beyond the immediate frontier, of routes that extended farther than imperial maps suggested. When he finally returned to Han territory, he was not simply a survivor. He was a bridge. And bridges alter history. When Zhang Qian returned to Han territory, he did not arrive with an army. He arrived with stories. 10 years older, weathered, carrying knowledge instead of triumph. In the imperial court, his reappearance must have felt improbable. A diplomat long presumed lost walking once more through structured corridors of authority. The contrast would have been stark. After years of open sky and constant movement, the geometry of walls and columns must have felt almost unnatural. Yet, he did not return empty-handed. He spoke of lands beyond the immediate frontier, of the Daiwan in the Fergana Valley, whose horses were said to sweat blood. A poetic exaggeration, perhaps, but a signal of quality beyond what Han cavalry possessed. He described kingdoms further west, urban centers linked by trade corridors that stretched beyond anything the Han court had formally documented. He confirmed something powerful. The world did not end at the steppe. It extended, and it was organized. This realization mattered more than any single alliance, because until that moment, imperial strategy had been largely reactive. Defend, respond, contain. Now, a different possibility emerged. Engage. If powerful states existed beyond Xiongnu influence, then the Confederation was not an isolated force. It was part of a broader network, and networks can be counterbalanced. Zhang Qian's reports were not romantic tales of adventure. They were strategic blueprints. He described trade goods moving in segments across regions. He noted that silk, already valued as tribute and currency, could serve not only as luxury, but as leverage. Silk could purchase horses. Silk could secure cooperation. Silk could travel farther than soldiers. And perhaps most importantly, he had learned that knowledge traveled with goods. The Han court began to recognize that influence could move westward without territorial conquest. Diplomatic missions multiplied. Caravans received greater protection. Oases were reinforced. Over time, what had once been fragmented pathways began to stabilize, not as a single engineered road, but as a system of routes increasingly understood and deliberately used. This was not immediate transformation. It unfolded gradually, but something fundamental had shifted. The frontier was no longer a defensive boundary. It became a corridor, and corridors invite movement. For the Xiongnu, this meant new pressures from multiple directions. For intermediary traders in Central Asia, it meant opportunity. For the Han Empire, it meant the beginning of outward vision. And beyond the court, in towns and villages far from imperial debate, ordinary people felt the consequences quietly. Demand for silk increased. Production intensified. Artisans refined techniques. Farmers raised silkworms with greater care. Merchants, once confined to regional exchange, began to consider longer journeys. The decision of one envoy to survive captivity and return with information had altered economic gravity. This is how transformation often begins. Not with spectacle, but with perspective. A man leaves his homeland believing he understands its limits. He returns realizing those limits were imagined. And once the imagination expands, policy follows. Over the following decades, trade between East and West did not explode overnight. It accumulated, segment by segment, transaction by transaction, until patterns formed. Patterns became expectations. Expectations became infrastructure. Caravanserais emerged along desert edges. Taxation systems adapted. Local rulers learned to profit from safe passage. The Silk Road was not declared into existence. It coalesced from military anxiety, from diplomatic experimentation, from merchant ambition. Zhang Qian did not build the road, but he revealed that it was possible. And possibility is often the most powerful catalyst in history. In the quiet after his reports were delivered, after the court absorbed the implications, after new missions were planned, life along the frontier continued. Caravans prepared to depart. Supplies were counted. Waterskins inspected. And somewhere beyond the city gates, a merchant tightened the straps on his pack animals. He did not know the name Silk Road. No one did, but he knew the risks. He knew the distances. And he knew that something valuable waited beyond the horizon. In the next chapter of this story, we leave imperial halls behind. We step outside the walls. We follow that merchant into the open land. Because strategy is conceived in palaces, but history is carried on the backs of those willing to walk. Chapter 4. You pack your bags. The night before, departure is never loud, even in a frontier city. The markets that buzzed all afternoon have quieted. Lantern light flickers against mud brick walls. Animals shift in their enclosures. Distant voices fade into private conversations. Tomorrow, you leave. You are not a diplomat, not a general, not a man whose name will be written in official records. You are a merchant, and survival will matter more than glory. Inside your courtyard, preparations continue under dim light. Bundles lie open, textiles folded tightly, rope coiled carefully. Silk, if you carry it, must be wrapped in layers to protect it from sand and moisture. Spices sealed in leather pouches. Metal goods padded to prevent clanging that might attract attention. Every item has weight, and weight has consequence. Too much, and your animals weaken before the first mountain pass. Too little, and the journey may not justify its cost. You check the water skins. Again, water is not a comfort, it is time. The amount you carry determines how far you can travel without risk. The desert does not negotiate. You inspect your camels. They kneel reluctantly as loads are secured. Their expressions are unreadable. They do not understand trade or empire. They understand balance. If weight shifts, they resist. If straps tighten unevenly, they groan. You run your hands along coarse fur, checking for sores. An injured animal can slow an entire caravan. Around you, others prepare in similar silence. Some merchants travel in small groups for protection. Others join larger caravans organized by experienced leaders who know which routes are safer in which season. Timing matters. Leave too early in the year, and mountain passes remain frozen. Leave too late, and desert heat becomes unforgiving. The route ahead is not a straight line. It is a series of decisions. Which oasis to trust? Which tribe controls a particular stretch? Which toll is fair, and which is a trap? You have heard stories. Caravans swallowed by sandstorms. Bandits who appear friendly at first. Officials who demand additional payment after safe passage has already been negotiated. You carry coin not only for trade, but for persuasion. You carry gifts, small offerings to smooth conversation. Because trade on the Silk Road is rarely simple exchange. It is relationship. It is reputation. If your name is associated with fairness, doors open more easily. If your name is associated with greed, word travels faster than you do. In a corner of the courtyard, a small fire burns low. You sit beside it briefly, not for warmth, for stillness. There is a moment before every long journey when doubt arrives quietly. You calculate profit in your mind, you calculate risk, you think of home, of those who remain behind. The Silk Road does not guarantee return. Some merchants vanish into the routes, some choose not to come back. They settle in distant cities, marry into foreign communities, adopt new languages. A movement changes identity. You know this, even if you do not say it aloud. Beyond the city walls, the night stretches wide. The same stars visible here shine above deserts and mountain ridges far ahead. There is comfort in that continuity. Morning will come quickly, and when the gates open, you will step into motion. Not because you seek adventure, but because the world is changing, and those who move adapt. Those who remain risk stagnation. The Silk Road is not built by heroes. It is built by those willing to measure weight carefully, to inspect water skins twice, and to accept that certainty is a luxury they cannot carry. Sleep will be shallow tonight. The ground feels harder when departure waits at dawn, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the walls, the land you are about to cross waits without emotion. Dawn does not arrive dramatically. It seeps into the horizon. A pale line of light separates earth from sky. Just passage. One by one, animals rise. Just passage. One by one, animals rise from their kneeling positions. Loads are checked again. Ropes tightened, knots inspected. The caravan begins to move, not quickly. There is no advantage in haste. The first stretch of road is deceptively easy. Packed earth. Gentle incline. Fields still visible behind you. You resist the instinct to look back too often. The sound of bells establishes rhythm. A soft metallic pulse that synchronizes with footsteps. Ahead, the caravan leader sets the pace. He knows that endurance matters more than speed. A slow, consistent march conserves energy. The formation stretches naturally. Experienced traders walk near the center. Newer travelers remain closer to those who know the route. Guards position themselves where visibility is widest, not because danger is immediate, but because vigilance is habit. Conversation begins quietly, not storytelling, not laughter, just practical exchange. How far to the next water source? Is the Western Pass still open this season? Which tribe holds the southern route this year? Information flows continuously. Not formally, but through repetition. A caravan survives on shared knowledge. By mid-morning, the city walls shrink behind you. Fields give way to rougher ground. The land widens. The road becomes less defined. You begin to notice how easily tracks disappear. Wind smooths surfaces quickly. The illusion of direction fades unless someone ahead remembers it clearly. This is why caravans form. Alone, you are vulnerable. In numbers, you are visible, but also resilient. The Silk Road is not a single engineered highway. It is a memory system. Oases known by reputation. Rock formations recognized by shape. Seasonal stars used as guides. The route exists because people remember it. You feel the weight of that continuity. Generations before you have walked similar paths. Their footprints are gone, but their decisions remain. At midday, the caravan halts briefly, not for comfort, for preservation. Animals kneel again. Water is measured carefully. You do not drink deeply, you sip. Your tongue wants more. But discipline overrides desire. Around you, faces glisten with early heat. Clothing shields skin from direct sun. Layers trap sweat just enough to cool. You learn quickly that survival here is not dramatic, it is incremental. A strap adjusted before it rubs raw. A pace slowed before exhaustion sets in. A minor disagreement resolved before it fractures trust. As the afternoon progresses, the terrain begins to change. Vegetation thins. The soil grows lighter. Wind carries finer particles. The air feels drier, even when you inhale fully. Someone ahead gestures toward a distant shimmer. You know better than to trust it. Mirages appear early in the journey, as if the land wishes to test perception. The caravan does not deviate. Experience overrules illusion. Toward evening, the group searches for suitable ground to rest. Not too exposed, not too concealed. Protection from wind, but visibility in all directions. Animals are unburdened slowly. Their relief is visible. You stretch muscles that have tightened during hours of measured motion. The horizon is broader here. Without city walls, the sky feels immense. There is beauty in it. But beauty does not guarantee safety. As night approaches, the temperature drops quickly. Heat dissipates into open air. The desert reminds you that extremes define it. A small fire is lit. Food is simple. Grain, dried meat, minimal spice. You listen more than you speak. Stories circulate softly. Of routes farther west. Of mountain passes that take breath away. Of stretches of sand where even seasoned traders hesitate. You understand now that today was gentle, a threshold. The land ahead will not remain forgiving. The Taklamakan Desert lies farther along this path. Its name is spoken carefully. Some say it means, once you enter, you may not come out. Whether literal or exaggerated, the warning lingers. You lie back on packed earth, and the stars feel closer than they did inside city walls. Movement has begun. There is no dramatic fanfare, no moment that announces transformation. Just distance accumulating quietly behind you. And somewhere ahead, heat, wind, and the kind of silence that tests resolve. Tomorrow, the land will grow harsher, and the Silk Road will begin to show its true nature. Chapter 5. The desert, with no exit morning, comes without softness. There are no trees here to filter the light. No walls to hold shadow. The sun rises clean and immediate. By mid-morning, heat presses downward like weight. The vegetation that once appeared in scattered patches has thinned to almost nothing. Ahead, the land shifts in color. Pale gold becomes white. White becomes a blinding reflection. You have entered the outer edges of the Taklamakan Desert. Its name is spoken carefully among traders. Some translate it as the place of no return. Whether literal or poetic, the meaning carries gravity. This desert does not overwhelm quickly. It erodes. The sand is not always in towering dunes. Sometimes it lies flat and endless, stretching in all directions without feature. This is its danger. Without landmarks, distance loses meaning. Hours pass. The caravan moves steadily. Bells still ring softly, but the sound feels smaller in the open expanse. Wind begins to rise. Not violent, just persistent. Fine particles lift into the air. They settle on skin, in hair, between teeth. You wrap cloth more tightly across your face. Breathing through fabric becomes necessary. The heat intensifies. Water breaks are scheduled carefully. No one drinks freely. You wet your lips. Tilt the skin slightly. Stop before satisfaction arrives. The discipline is not heroic. It is mathematical. Each swallow must correspond to distance. Animals feel it too. Camels are built for this terrain, but even they slow under prolonged exposure. Their long lashes protect their eyes from sand. Their wide feet prevent sinking too deeply. They are not graceful here, they are efficient. By midday, the horizon begins to shimmer. Shapes appear in the distance. Dark lines, rippling movement. The mind suggests water. Instinct suggests deviation. But the caravan does not change direction. Mirages are not rare in this place. They are routine. Illusion is part of the landscape. The real danger of the Taklamakan is not drama. It is monotony. Nothing changes. The same color, the same horizon, the same slow forward motion. Fatigue here is subtle. It accumulates in thought. You begin to measure time differently, not by hours but by shade. When will there be shade? The answer is often, not soon. Late afternoon brings a different threat. Wind strengthens. Grains of sand move faster. What began as irritation becomes abrasion. You narrow your eyes, tilt your head downward. The caravan tightens formation instinctively. Loose spacing invites separation, and separation in this environment can become permanent. There are stories of traders who stepped aside to relieve themselves and returned to find nothing but empty horizon. A small deviation becomes disappearance. You understand now why routes are memorized rather than explored. There is no advantage in curiosity here. Precision is survival. As the sun begins its descent, the temperature does not immediately drop. Heat radiates from the ground long after daylight fades. The caravan presses on slightly longer than usual. An oasis must be reached before full darkness. Water sources in this desert are not abundant. They are spaced carefully across distance, known, guarded, relied upon. When at last a faint cluster of darker shapes appears ahead, not shimmering, not illusory, relief spreads quietly through the group. No cheering, no sudden speed, just subtle easing of breath. Palm silhouettes break the horizon. Low shrubs cluster near a depression in the sand. Water lies below. Not abundant, but present. The caravan approaches carefully. Animals kneel with visible exhaustion. You step down slowly, legs stiff from hours of controlled movement. The first cup of water is not indulgent. It is deliberate. You drink. Pause. Drink again. Your body absorbs it almost instantly. Around you, others move with similar restraint. No one forgets that tomorrow the desert continues. As night falls, the temperature shifts sharply. Heat withdraws. Cold settles. The same land that pressed down with fire now releases stored chill. You wrap yourself more tightly. The silence here is different from the steppe. It feels heavier. Sound does not travel far. Even the bells seem muted. You lie back, staring at a sky so clear it feels infinite. The Taklamakan does not roar. It does not rage. It simply exists, indifferent, testing patience more than courage, and tomorrow you will walk again into its sameness. Because there is no alternate route, only forward. The second day in the desert feels longer than the first, not because the distance is greater, but because the illusion of novelty has faded. There is no surprise left in the landscape, only repetition. The sun rises again, indifferent. The caravan forms again. Movement resumes. You have already begun to understand something essential. The Taklamakan does not defeat you through spectacle. It defeats you through sameness. Mid-morning passes without incident. The ground remains firm beneath thin layers of sand. Wind drifts lightly from the west. But by midday, something changes. The air thickens, not with heat alone, but with motion. You feel it first against your cheek, a subtle increase in pressure. Then the wind strengthens, not in a single violent gust, but in gathering layers. Grains of sand lift higher. The horizon blurs. The caravan leader signals with a raised arm. The line tightens, voices lower. Camels kneel partially to reduce exposure. You wrap cloth across your face again. Pull it tighter. The storm does not roar at first. It builds. A slow crescendo. Visibility narrows. The sun becomes a pale disk behind moving haze. There is no clear boundary between ground and sky, only shifting light. You keep your eyes lowered. Too much exposure dries them painfully. The bells of the caravan grow irregular. Wind distorts their rhythm. You focus on sound, the bell ahead of you, the breathing of the animal beside you, the scrape of sand against fabric. In this moment, the greatest danger is separation. A step too far left. A moment of hesitation. The desert does not provide orientation. You resist the instinct to move independently, to seek clearer air. Instead, you stay close. The storm intensifies briefly. Sand stings exposed skin. It finds its way into folds of clothing, into seams, into the corners of your mouth. Breathing feels heavier, but panic would waste air. You slow your inhale, lengthen your exhale. The caravan remains still. Movement in a sandstorm invites confusion. Better to endure. Time becomes uncertain. Minutes stretch. The world reduces to immediate sensation. Fabric against skin, wind in ears, the weight of your own posture. Then, gradually, the force diminishes. Not suddenly, just enough to notice. The haze thins. The sun sharpens, shapes return. Camels rise again, shaking sand from their coats. You wipe your eyes carefully, blink away grit. Around you, faces are coated pale, eyebrows rimmed in dust. No one speaks loudly. Relief is practical, not celebratory. The desert has tested alignment, and the caravan has held. But the storm leaves a subtle consequence. Landmarks, if any existed, are erased. Tracks vanish. The surface is smoothed into anonymity. The leader pauses longer now. He studies the sun's position, consults memory, consults stars still faintly visible in his mind from the previous night. The Silk Road in the desert is not a carved path. It is knowledge passed between people. If that knowledge falters, the desert absorbs the mistake. Movement resumes slowly. Confidence is quieter than before. You notice something partially exposed along the route. A curved shape protruding from the sand. At first glance, it resembles driftwood, but there are no trees here. As you pass closer, the outline becomes clearer. Bone, not fresh, bleached pale by years of sun, a rib cage, half buried. Nearby, fragments of leather hardened by time. A buckle, a broken strap, no markers, no grave. The desert keeps what it takes. You do not stare long. There is no benefit in dwelling. But the image settles. A reminder that miscalculation has a permanence here. As evening approaches, the caravan reaches another shallow depression in the terrain. Not a full oasis, just a windbreak. Enough to camp without full exposure. The sky turns from white to amber, then to deep violet. Temperature drops again with surprising speed. You sit quietly, cleaning sand from your belongings, grain by grain. It has entered everything, it always does. Someone nearby murmurs that the Taklamakan has moods. Another replies that it has none. It simply exists. This may be closer to the truth. The desert is not malicious. It is not strategic. It does not hunt. It does not spare. It is scale without emotion. You lie down beneath a sky more expansive than any city ceiling. Your body is tired, but not broken. Your supplies remain intact. The caravan remains whole. Tomorrow, the desert will continue, and so will you. Because beyond this expanse, there are mountains waiting. And mountains demand a different kind of endurance. Chapter 6. The Roof of the World. The desert does not end abruptly. It fades. Sand thins into gravel. Gravel shifts into stone. The horizon begins to rise. For days, the incline is subtle. So subtle that you notice it first in your breath, not in the landscape. Inhale. Slightly shorter. Exhale. Slightly heavier. The caravan has reached the outer edges of the Pamir Mountains. Some call them the roof of the world. It is not a poetic exaggeration. The land here rises so gradually that the sky feels closer with each mile. Vegetation reappears briefly in scattered patches. Low shrubs clinging stubbornly to thin soil. Small streams fed by distant snowmelt. Water here is colder, sharper. But altitude introduces a different kind of test. The heat of the desert demanded patience. The mountains demand oxygen. By mid-morning, you feel it clearly. Your steps are steady, but your lungs work harder. Each incline, no matter how minor, requires deliberate pacing. The caravan adjusts naturally. Breaks become slightly more frequent. Not for thirst, for breath. You notice that conversation fades, not out of tension, out of conservation. Speech consumes air, and air feels more valuable here. The path narrows. Where once the caravan stretched wide across open land, it now threads between rock formations. Sheer drops appear to the side. Not dramatic cliffs at first, just reminders that gravity has become relevant again. Camels, so confident in sand, move more cautiously here. Their broad feet, perfect for desert, must navigate uneven stone. Loads are redistributed carefully. Balance matters more than ever. The wind behaves differently in mountains. It funnels. Sharp gusts rush through narrow passes without warning. Cold replaces heat with surprising speed. You wrap an additional layer around your shoulders. The desert's fire feels distant now. At midday, the caravan halts beside a glacial stream. The water is clear, nearly invisible against stone. You kneel to drink. It is colder than expected. The chill spreads through your body instantly. Refreshing, but also sobering. Altitude sickness arrives quietly. A dull ache behind the eyes. A slight dizziness when standing too quickly. Not everyone feels it equally. Some adjust naturally, others struggle. You observe a trader ahead of you pause longer than usual. His breath comes unevenly. The caravan leader watches him carefully. Pushing too hard here can cost more than time. Mountains do not allow recovery as easily as plains. The ascent continues in measured increments. Snow appears in distant ridges, at first as faint streaks, then as defined caps. The scale shifts dramatically. What seemed vast in the desert now feels enclosed by towering walls of stone. A sound behaves differently. Footsteps echo faintly. Wind whistles between peaks. Silence carries weight. There are fewer stories here about bandits. The terrain discourages large-scale ambush, but the risk is subtler. Loose rock, unstable footing, sudden weather shifts. Clouds gather faster at altitude. You watch them form over peaks with surprising speed. By late afternoon, shadows lengthen sharply. Temperature drops more quickly than in the desert. Your breath becomes visible again. The caravan seeks a campsite sheltered from direct wind. A narrow basin between ridges offers partial protection. Animals kneel gratefully. You remove your pack and feel a different kind of fatigue. Not the draining heat of sand, but the hollow strain of thin air. As night approaches, the sky transforms. Stars appear brighter here, closer. The Milky Way stretches in astonishing clarity. Without desert dust, without city smoke, the universe feels immediate. But beauty does not ease breathing. You lie back and notice your heart beating faster than usual. Altitude requires adjustment. Sleep comes in fragments. You wake occasionally, aware of your lungs working. Above you, the peaks remain silent. The Pamir Mountains do not test endurance through monotony. They test it through scale. They remind you that human systems, trade, empire, strategy, are temporary. Stone is not. Tomorrow, the path will climb higher. And, with each step upward, the margin for error will narrow. The third day in the mountains feels steeper. Not because the incline has changed dramatically, but because your body has. Altitude does not announce itself loudly. It accumulates. A slight pressure behind the eyes. A persistent dryness in the throat. A fatigue that does not disappear after rest. The caravan rises before sunrise. It is easier to climb while the air is colder and still. Your breath fogs in front of you. Each step is deliberate. The path now narrows along a ridge. To your right, stone rises sharply. To your left, the land falls away in layered slopes that dissolve into mist. Camels move carefully. Their hooves test each surface before committing weight. You notice the silence. In the desert, wind filled the emptiness. Here, the silence is vertical. Sound rises and disappears. Halfway through the morning ascent, one of the traders stumbles. Not dramatically. Just a missed placement of the foot. A loose stone shifts. His balance tilts. For a brief moment, the entire caravan tightens. The animal he leads shifts as well, adjusting instinctively. Hands reach, weight redistributes. The moment passes, but it leaves a residue. In the mountains, recovery is limited. You cannot simply step aside and recalibrate. Every movement interacts with gravity. Later, as the incline steepens, breathing becomes more uneven. You feel it in your chest now. Air enters, but does not satisfy. Your heart beats faster than the pace demands. The caravan leader calls for a longer halt, not because time allows comfort, but because oxygen requires respect. Some traders sit quietly, heads lowered. Others lie back briefly on stone, warmed by early sun. You feel a faint dizziness when standing too quickly. It fades, but slowly. Altitude sickness can escalate without warning. Headache becomes nausea. Nausea becomes weakness. Weakness becomes risk. There are no physicians waiting at the summit. Only the next stretch of path. Clouds gather in the afternoon, not dark storm clouds, but dense, fast-moving formations that obscure distant peaks. Visibility shrinks. The world reduces again to immediate terrain. Snow appears in thin patches across shaded sections of trail. Ice forms where meltwater refreezes overnight. You step carefully. Camels hesitate at slick surfaces. Loads must remain balanced. In places where the path becomes too narrow, merchants dismount and walk beside their animals. Your legs tremble slightly from exertion. You do not speak of it. Everyone feels something similar. The cold intensifies quickly once the sun dips behind peaks. You wrap yourself more tightly. Wind cuts through fabric with sharper precision than desert gusts. At a high pass, the caravan pauses. Not formally, but naturally. The view expands unexpectedly. Valleys stretch beyond the ridgeline. Layers of mountain fade into blue distance. It is here, standing above both desert and plains, that the question becomes unavoidable. Why cross this at all? Why endure heat, thirst, sand, thin air, risk of fall, risk of loss? The answer is not romantic. It is not destiny. It is incentive. Beyond these mountains lie markets where goods multiply in value. Silk exchanged for horses. Horses exchanged for silver. Silver exchanged for spices. Distance creates worth. The farther something travels, the rarer it becomes. And rarity reshapes economies. The Silk Road persists because profit outweighs fear. Because survival sometimes demands expansion. Because those who master routes others avoid gain advantage. You descend slowly from the pass. The path widens slightly. Breathing becomes marginally easier. The air feels less compressed. Even so, fatigue lingers. As evening approaches, the caravan reaches a plateau dotted with sparse grazing patches. Not fertile land, but survivable. Tents are pitched quickly. Fires burn low. Fuel is limited at this elevation. You sit with others in close proximity for warmth. Conversation returns cautiously. Stories circulate about traders farther west who speak languages unfamiliar to Han ears. About middlemen who negotiate between cultures with remarkable fluency. There are people who live between worlds, not fully of the steppe, not fully of the cities. They understand multiple currencies, multiple customs, multiple expectations. Without them, much of this journey would fail. You begin to realize something important. The Silk Road is not sustained by emperors, it is sustained by intermediaries, by those who translate risk into agreement, by those who know which mountain path remains open in early spring and which oasis is controlled by a rival clan. Beyond the Pamir Mountains, in cities scattered across Central Asia, these intermediaries thrive. They do not seek conquest. They seek continuity. As night falls, the sky clears completely. Stars stretch across blackness with unsettling clarity. The mountains no longer feel oppressive. They feel immense. Your breathing steadies gradually. Your body adjusts. Tomorrow, the path will descend toward new lands, new accents, new negotiations. The desert tested endurance. The mountains tested fragility. Ahead lies something different. Not landscape, but people. And they may prove just as complex as the terrain. Chapter 7. The Quiet Middlemen. When the mountains begin to soften and the air grows thicker again, the world does not suddenly become easier. It becomes more human. The first settlements beyond the Pamir are not grand capitals. They are trade towns, built along river bends, clustered near caravan rest points, positioned where geography funnels movement naturally. Mud brick walls enclose narrow streets. Markets form around central wells. Languages overlap in unexpected combinations. Here, you hear accents unfamiliar to both Han China and Rome, Persian inflections, steppe dialects, fragments of Indian speech. This is not an empire's frontier. It is a threshold, and thresholds are profitable. Among the most skilled inhabitants of these corridors are the Sogdians. They are not conquerors. They are connectors. Their homeland lies in Central Asia, around cities like Samarkand and Bukhara. But their influence extends far beyond geography. Sogdian merchants understand something fundamental. No single trader needs to cross the entire continent. Instead, goods move in segments. A bolt of silk may leave Chang'an. It travels west under one merchant's supervision. It changes hands in a Central Asian city. It continues with another caravan toward Persia, then onward again toward Mediterranean ports. At each stage, value increases. Distance adds rarity. Rarity adds price. The Sogdians thrive in this segmentation. They speak multiple languages. They marry into local communities. They memorize routes, toll structures, seasonal hazards. They are cultural translators, not merely linguistically, but socially. They know which gifts are appropriate in which courts. They know how to flatter without offending. They know when silence protects negotiation. In caravanserais, those fortified roadside inns that dot major routes, Sogdian traders gather information as carefully as they gather goods. A caravanserai is more than lodging. It is an intelligence exchange. Merchants share news of bandit activity, political unrest, weather patterns, currency shifts. One evening's conversation can alter an entire route. Here, reputation becomes currency. If a Sogdian merchant vouches for safe passage, others listen. If he warns against a particular corridor, few ignore the advice. Unlike imperial bureaucracies, their authority is not formalized. It is accumulated. Trust built transaction by transaction. You begin to notice how trade differs from conquest. Conquest imposes. Trade persuades. The Silk Road expands not because armies occupy every mile, but because middlemen make movement predictable. Predictability reduces risk. Reduced risk invites participation. Participation builds network density. The Sogdians understand that the most powerful position is not always at the center of empire. It is between empires, between Rome and Han, between Persia and India, between nomad and settler. They are comfortable in ambiguity, in overlapping identities. Their homes display blended aesthetics, motifs from east and west woven into textiles and painted onto walls. Religious tolerance is practical here. Zoroastrian fire altars stand not far from Buddhist shrines. Foreign deities appear alongside local traditions. Belief travels with goods. And in trade cities, flexibility sustains stability. You walk through one such market town at dusk. Spices from India sit beside Chinese lacquerware. Glassware from the West reflects light in unfamiliar colors. A Sogdian trader gestures animatedly as he negotiates in a language you barely recognize. He shifts tone fluidly depending on who approaches. To a Persian buyer, he adopts one rhythm. To a steppe intermediary, another. He is never entirely one thing, and that adaptability is survival. You realize now that your journey across desert and mountain would likely have failed without such people waiting beyond the passes. The Silk Road is not a line. It is a chain, and each link depends on those willing to stand in between. As evening settles, lamps illuminate courtyard markets. Deals are concluded quietly. Contracts are verbal, sealed not by parchment alone, but by expectation of future interaction. Trust here is long-term calculation. The Sogdians do not need to rule vast territory. They rule continuity, and continuity across centuries is more powerful than a single conquest. Tomorrow, negotiations will begin in earnest. You will not sell everything at once. You will exchange selectively, holding back some goods for better markets farther west. Because now you understand, movement is layered, and those who master layers shape the world quietly. In Rome, silk was mysterious. It shimmered differently than wool or linen. It flowed against the skin like water. It felt almost unnatural. Senators debated whether it was morally weakening. Some claimed it made men soft. Others admired its elegance too much to resist. But few in Rome understood where it truly came from. There were theories. Some believed silk was harvested from trees. Others imagined it was combed from exotic leaves in distant forests. The truth, that it originated from silkworms carefully cultivated in China, remained obscured. And that obscurity was intentional. Between Rome and Han China stood layers of intermediaries. Parthian traders controlled key western corridors. Sogdian merchants dominated segments across Central Asia. Neither group had incentive to reveal the full chain. Information, like silk, increased in value when it traveled through selective hands. If Rome had known the precise origin of silk, it might have attempted direct contact. Direct contact reduces middlemen. Middlemen protect their position carefully. Parthian authorities taxed caravans moving through their territory. They managed routes that linked Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean. They understood that controlling access meant controlling profit. They did not need to conquer Rome, or they only needed to remain essential. The same logic applied further east. Sogdian traders did not claim empire. They cultivated indispensability. They learned multiple scripts, maintained correspondence across regions. They transmitted not only goods, but expectations. A caravan leaving Chang'an might carry silk westward, but by the time it reached Roman markets, it had passed through numerous negotiations. Each exchange added margin. Each border added narrative. Stories attached themselves to products. Silk became not only rare, but mythical. Myth increases desire. Desire increases price. The Silk Road thrived on partial knowledge. Everyone knew something. No one knew everything. This fragmentation created stability, because no single actor could dominate the entire network. Power was distributed, layered, adaptive. You observe this dynamic firsthand in the market town. A Sogdian trader inspects your goods carefully. He does not rush. He asks questions that seem casual, but are precise. How many bolts remain behind you? Which route did you take through the mountains? Were there signs of unrest near the southern passes? These questions are not idle conversation. They are intelligence gathering. Information determines leverage. If supply from the east has been interrupted, he adjusts his offer. If political tensions rise in Persia, he anticipates increased demand westward. Trade along the Silk Road is less about exchange and more about timing. Those who control timing control advantage. At night in the caravanserai, you hear murmurs about Roman appetite for silk growing stronger. Gold flows eastward steadily. Silver changes hands in large quantities. The imbalance is noticed. Some Han officials have already expressed concern about precious metals leaving their territories in exchange for goods. Trade creates wealth, but it also creates dependency. This is another quiet truth of the Silk Road. Connection amplifies both prosperity and vulnerability. The Parthians understand this. They maintain distance between Rome and China intentionally. Not hostile distance, but structured distance. Direct diplomatic contact between the two empires remains limited for centuries. Intermediaries filter communication. They manage expectations. They ensure that no one bypasses the established chain. You begin to see that the Silk Road is not merely a trade route. It is a managed ecosystem. Routes shift according to season. Alliances shift according to politics. Prices shift according to rumor. And rumor moves quickly, sometimes faster than caravans. You adjust your own strategy accordingly. You sell a portion of your goods here. You hold some back for markets farther west. You accept not only coin, but information, because information may prove more valuable later. In these towns, people are fluent in uncertainty. They do not fear overlapping identities. A merchant might honor Persian customs at dawn, negotiate in a Turkic dialect by midday, and discuss Buddhist philosophy by night. This flexibility is not philosophical indulgence. It is economic necessity. As the weeks pass and your goods change hands, you sense a shift in atmosphere. These Central Asian trade hubs are not merely corridors. They are becoming centers. Wealth accumulates. Architecture grows more elaborate. Markets expand. The Silk Road is thickening, not only in distance, but in density. And far to the east, in Chang'an, and far to the west, in cities of the Islamic world that will soon rise to prominence, urban centers are preparing to absorb the momentum of this network. The middlemen have done their work. They have stabilized exchange. They have refined routes. They have transformed risk into routine. Now, the Silk Road is ready for something larger. Not just survival, not just segmented trade, but cultural bloom. As you prepare to move onward, the mountain air feels distant behind you. Ahead lie cities where caravans converge in numbers unimaginable in the desert. Cities where languages echo through stone courtyards. Cities where the Silk Road ceases to feel like a path and becomes a civilization. Chapter 8, Chang'an at Dawn. Before the markets open, Chang'an is quiet. The capital of the Tang dynasty does not wake abruptly. It unfolds. Dawn light filters across tiled rooftops. Mist lingers in low courtyards. The city walls, vast and deliberate, hold the morning still for a moment longer. Chang'an is not merely large, it is designed. Broad avenues intersect in ordered grids. Gates regulate movement between districts. Night curfews once sealed neighborhoods until morning drums signaled permission to circulate. Control and flow coexist here. From above, the city resembles intention. Within it, it resembles convergence. As the sun rises fully, movement begins. Shop shutters lift. Street vendors arrange goods. Stable hands brush down horses still dusty from long journeys. You enter through one of the western gates with your caravan. The contrast to desert silence is immediate. Sound multiplies. Footsteps on stone. Voices layered in unfamiliar cadence. Metal tools striking rhythmically in workshops. Caravans arrive not alone, but in waves. From the Tarim Basin, from the steppes, from lands beyond the mountains you have just crossed. Chang'an absorbs them all. Foreign traders are not anomalies here. They are expected. Districts exist where Sogdian, Persian, and Central Asian communities cluster. Temples reflect diverse beliefs. Buddhist monasteries stand not far from Zoroastrian fire altars. Nestorian Christian churches appear quietly within certain quarters. Religious architecture does not threaten the city's order. It becomes part of it, because Chang'an understands something essential. Trade strengthens empire, and empire sustains trade. In the marketplace, silk is no longer rare. It is currency of prestige. Bolts are displayed in layered stacks. Colors vary according to dye and origin. Artisans evaluate weave density with practiced fingers. Nearby, lacquerware gleams under angled light. Paper scrolls are stacked carefully within protective cases. Paper, once a local innovation, has become indispensable. You pass a scribe copying texts swiftly, brush moving with fluid certainty. Knowledge here travels not only by memory, but by replication. Chang'an does not merely consume goods, it redistributes them. Tribute missions from neighboring states arrive ceremonially. Foreign envoys present gifts that signal recognition of Tang authority. In return, they receive silk, coins, and formal acknowledgement. Diplomacy and commerce intertwine. You notice the scale of infrastructure. Warehouses line major corridors. Granaries rise in deliberate proportion. Tax officials record transactions meticulously. The Silk Road is no longer improvisational here. It is institutionalized. Caravans register goods. Customs duties are assessed. Protection is offered in exchange for compliance. Within palace walls, administrators track fluctuations in trade volume. They monitor silver inflow and outflow. They understand that the empire's stability depends partly on maintaining balance. Chang'an at dawn feels orderly. But beneath that order lies complexity. Merchants debate exchange rates in shaded courtyards. Officials negotiate tariffs with careful politeness. Artisans adapt foreign techniques into local styles. Motifs from Persia appear in Chinese textiles. Central Asian musicians perform in court ceremonies. Cuisine evolves subtly as ingredients from distant regions arrive more regularly. The Silk Road does not only transport commodities, it transports aesthetics, philosophies, technologies. As midday approaches, the city grows louder. Caravans unload goods into designated compounds. Animals are led to enclosed resting areas. You feel the shift within yourself. The isolation of desert and mountain has dissolved into density. Here, anonymity replaces exposure. You are one merchant among thousands. And yet, you are part of something vast. The Silk Road in Chang'an is not a risky path. It is an artery. It pulses constantly. The Tang dynasty thrives partly because it sits at the eastern heart of this network. It projects stability outward. It absorbs novelty inward. And in doing so, it transforms trade into civilization. As evening approaches, lanterns illuminate avenues in structured sequence. Music drifts from entertainment districts. Scholars debate in tea houses. Foreign accents mingle freely in crowded markets. The Silk Road has matured here. It is no longer survival, it is symbiosis. But even symbiosis requires vigilance, because networks that grow dense also grow vulnerable. And somewhere beyond these walls, events are already unfolding that will test this golden equilibrium. For now, however, Chang'an glows, not merely with wealth, but with connection. As the days pass in Chang'an, you begin to understand that this city is not simply prosperous, it is curious. Curiosity flows through its streets as freely as trade. In tea houses, scholars debate not only Confucian doctrine, but foreign philosophies carried along the routes. Buddhist monks discuss sutras translated from Sanskrit. Travelers recount distant customs. Officials inquire about political shifts in lands far beyond the frontier. Information here is valued almost as highly as silk. Within the imperial court, and this openness is deliberate. The Tang dynasty recognizes that legitimacy grows through confidence. Confidence allows tolerance. Foreign communities are granted districts of residence. Markets are regulated, but not suffocated. Diversity is not chaos, it is strength. In ceremonial halls, envoys from Central Asia stand beside representatives from Korea and Vietnam. They present tribute, exotic animals, precious stones, crafted objects unfamiliar to local artisans. In return, This exchange is theater, but it is also. This exchange is theater, but it is also policy. Trade sustains the spectacle. Spectacle reinforces authority. Authority stabilizes trade. The system feeds itself. But systems that feed themselves can also become dependent. A city that thrives on distant stability is only as secure as its most fragile frontier. In artisan quarters, foreign techniques are quietly absorbed. Metalwork incorporates Persian patterns. Textile designs reflect Central Asian geometry. Music performed in court ensembles features instruments of steppe origin. Chang'an does not remain culturally static. It metabolizes influence. You notice the rhythm of caravans arriving and departing. Some merchants remain for months, waiting for favorable market conditions. Others move quickly, carrying Tang goods westward. Paper, in particular, becomes increasingly important. Its lightness compared to bamboo or silk scrolls makes it ideal for transmission. Administrative records multiply. Poetry spreads beyond elite circles. Knowledge begins to travel more efficiently. And yet, beneath this brilliance, there is subtle vulnerability. A city that depends on continuous inflow must guard against interruption. Political stability on distant frontiers matters deeply. If mountain passes close, if steppe alliances fracture, if desert routes become unsafe, Chang'an feels it. Granaries and warehouses buffer fluctuation, but not indefinitely. You sense awareness of this fragility in official discourse. Frontier generals are monitored closely. Reports from the western regions are read with care. The Silk Road has made the Tang dynasty powerful, but it has also tied its prosperity to lands it does not fully control. At night, the city glows with lantern light. From rooftop terraces, music drifts across districts. Foreign merchants dine beside local officials. Wine flows in ceramic cups painted with motifs inspired by distant lands. You sit within this abundance and reflect on the journey that brought you here. The desert's silence feels distant. The mountain's thin air almost unreal. Here, air is thick with conversation. And yet, the Silk Road continues beyond Chang'an. The eastern terminus is not the end of movement. Goods flow outward again, westward, toward cities that mirror Chang'an's vibrancy in different forms, across Central Asia, across Persia, toward a rising center in the Islamic world, a city that will soon rival any on earth in intellectual ambition. Baghdad, where scholars gather manuscripts from every direction, where translation becomes state policy, where paper will change civilization once more. Chang'an represents one pole of the Silk Road's golden age. Baghdad will represent another. Together, they form a luminous axis across Eurasia. As you prepare to depart eastward, goods and westward curiosity in equal measure, you realize that the Silk Road has matured. It is no longer improvisation. It is infrastructure. It is diplomacy. It is culture layered upon commerce. But infrastructure invites scale, and scale invites consequence. For now, though, Chang'an rests in its confidence. A city at dawn and at dusk, believing its connection to the world is both natural and permanent. History will test that belief, but that is yet to come. For now, the Silk Road shines. Chapter 9, Baghdad and the House of Wisdom. By the 8th century, power had shifted westward. Not in a single dramatic rupture, but through gradual transformation. The Abbasid Caliphate rose from the political currents of the Islamic world and established a new capital along the Tigris River. Baghdad was not ancient when it was founded. It was intentional. Designed as a circular city, symbolic and strategic, with the caliph's palace at its center. If Chang'an represented inherited order, Baghdad represented constructed ambition. It sat near fertile riverbanks, connected to trade routes that stretched from the Mediterranean to Central Asia and beyond. The caravans that once dispersed across smaller Persian cities now found a gravitational pull here. The Silk Road, in its western arc, had found a new intellectual anchor. At dawn, the Tigris reflects the first light softly. Boats move along its surface, carrying goods that have traveled immense distances. Paper from the East, spices from India, textiles from China, glassware from Syria, silver from distant mines. Markets open with deliberate rhythm. Merchants lay out goods beneath shaded awnings. Languages intertwine, Arabic dominant, but Persian, Turkic, Greek, and others audible in layered conversation. Baghdad absorbs influence much as Chang'an does, but its emphasis leans differently. Where Tang China metabolized culture into aesthetic synthesis, Baghdad channels exchange into scholarship. The Abbasid rulers understand something profound. Knowledge strengthens empire. Under their patronage, translation becomes policy. Texts from Greece, Persia, and India are gathered deliberately. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, they are not curiosities, they are tools. At the center of this movement stands the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. It is not merely a building, it is an institution. Scholars assemble to translate manuscripts into Arabic. Greek works of Aristotle and Galen, Persian administrative treatises, Indian mathematical concepts. Paper plays a crucial role in this transformation. Unlike parchment, which requires animal skins and labor-intensive preparation, paper is lighter, cheaper, more adaptable. Its production techniques traveled westward along the Silk Road. Legend speaks of Chinese papermakers captured after a battle in Central Asia, their knowledge transferred to Islamic lands. Whether embellished or not, the result is clear. Paper spreads rapidly. The more connected the world becomes, the more quietly vulnerable it grows. Integration multiplies brilliance. It also multiplies consequence. Baghdad becomes a city of copying, of commentary, of expansion upon inherited thought. In shaded courtyards, scribes lean over low tables, brushes and reed pens gliding steadily. Ink stains fingertips permanently. Margins fill with notes. Debate unfolds not in whispers, but in structured argument. Merchants who arrive with caravans may carry goods in one direction and manuscripts in another. Knowledge becomes cargo. It moves beside silk and spice. It travels as gift, as commission, as diplomatic offering. The Silk Road here is no longer primarily about survival. It is about synthesis. Ideas from India influence Islamic astronomy. Greek logic intersects with Persian administration. Chinese paper multiplies everything. You walk through Baghdad's markets and notice the difference from Chang'an. The scale is similar, the diversity just as vibrant, but the atmosphere feels slightly more analytical. In coffee houses and scholarly circles, conversation turns quickly to abstraction. What is the nature of number? How does the movement of planets correspond to divine order? What medical practices can reduce suffering? Trade has created wealth. Wealth has funded inquiry. Inquiry begins to reshape the world quietly, and yet, as in Chang'an, prosperity depends on continuity. Caravans must continue to arrive. Routes must remain open. Political stability across Central Asia matters deeply. If mountain passes close, if steppe alliances fracture, if desert routes grow unsafe, Baghdad will feel it. For now, though, the network holds. Goods flow steadily. Scholars translate patiently. And the Silk Road enters one of its most luminous phases. Inside the House of Wisdom, time feels different. It is not measured by caravan schedules or by the opening of market gates. It is measured in pages. in lines copied carefully from older manuscripts, in marginal notes written in smaller script beside inherited thought. Scholars sit cross-legged on woven mats. Some read aloud while others transcribe. Translation is rarely solitary. Greek philosophical works arrive in Syriac intermediaries. Indian mathematical texts appear in fragments. Persian administrative manuals carry insights into governance. Each document is both artifact and opportunity. The act of translation is not passive. It is interpretation. To translate is to choose words. To choose words is to shape meaning. Among the figures associated with this intellectual flowering is Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. He works with numbers, but not numbers as mere counting tools. He approaches them as systems. From Indian sources comes the concept of positional notation, digits that gain value according to placement. 0, once an abstraction, becomes a functional symbol. In the quiet of Baghdad's scholarly circles, al-Khwarizmi writes about methods of calculation. His treatises travel. Over centuries, his name will evolve in Latin manuscripts into something unexpected, algorithm, a word that will outlive empires. At the time, however, it is simply scholarship. Paper multiplies his work quickly. Copies spread through the Islamic world, from Baghdad to Cordoba, from Cairo to Samarkand. Astronomers refine star charts using Indian and Persian models. Physicians expand upon Greek anatomical knowledge. Philosophers debate the compatibility of reason and revelation. None of this happens in isolation. The Silk Road sustains it. Caravans deliver manuscripts alongside textiles. Merchants sponsor copying in exchange for prestige. Rulers fund scholars to enhance legitimacy. Knowledge becomes currency of authority. Baghdad's libraries grow dense with scrolls and bound volumes. Catalogs expand. Book markets thrive. A merchant who once carried only silk may now carry paper bundles containing treatises. Information has weight, but far less than metal. It travels efficiently. You sit in a shaded courtyard near a bookseller's stall. The scent of ink lingers faintly in warm air. A scholar nearby argues gently about planetary motion. He gestures upward as if the sky were close enough to correct. It is easy to forget that beyond these walls lie deserts and mountains, but they remain essential. If routes falter, translation slows. If caravans are interrupted, manuscripts do not arrive. Intellectual bloom depends on physical continuity, and continuity depends on cooperation across vast distances. Baghdad thrives because it is connected, because Sogdian intermediaries maintain corridors, because steppe alliances hold long enough, because Chinese papermaking techniques traveled west. The Silk Road is not simply a trade network. It is a circulatory system. Ideas move through it. Religious thought moves through it. Scientific method moves through it. As evening settles over the Tigris, lanterns glow in courtyards where scholars continue working past sunset. Their conversations are quiet but persistent. They are not aware that centuries later, their translations will influence European universities. They do not imagine Renaissance thinkers rediscovering Aristotle through Arabic commentaries. They work because inquiry feels necessary. The Silk Road has matured again. From survival to trade, from trade to cities, from cities to thought. But thought travels in more than philosophical texts. Belief travels as well. Long before Baghdad's scholars debated metaphysics, monks and missionaries had already begun crossing deserts and mountains. Buddhism moved from India into China. Nestorian Christianity reached Central Asia. Islam itself expanded through trade as much as conquest. The same routes that carried silk and mathematics carried devotion. and devotion, like trade, adapts to terrain. As night deepens, the murmur of scholarly discussion fades into distant quiet. But somewhere along the routes beyond Baghdad, a monk is packing manuscripts. A pilgrim is preparing for departure. A trader is carrying small carved icons among bolts of cloth. The Silk Road is not only about wealth, it is about meaning. And in the next chapter of this journey, we will follow belief as it travels, across sand, across stone, across language. Chapter 10. When religions travel. Long before merchants calculated profit, long before scholars debated planetary motion, belief was already moving across Eurasia. It did not travel as quickly as rumor. It did not glitter like silk. It did not clink like silver. But it endured. The Silk Road carried religions not in caravans of spectacle, but in footsteps. One monk at a time. One manuscript wrapped carefully in cloth. One quiet conversation beside a desert fire. Buddhism began its journey from India northward and eastward, centuries before Baghdad's libraries flourished. At first, it moved through established trade corridors. Monks often accompanied caravans for safety. In exchange, they offered blessings, interpretations of suffering, and a cosmology that stretched beyond immediate hardship. For traders crossing deserts and mountains, the concept of impermanence felt less abstract. Everything in their world shifted: weather, alliances, fortune. The Buddha's teachings traveled not because they were imposed, but because they resonated. Along the routes through Central Asia, Buddhist monasteries appeared near oasis towns. These were not isolated retreats, they were rest points. Caravan travelers paused for water and shelter, and encountered murals depicting stories unfamiliar to them. Walls painted with scenes of past lives. Bodhisattvas adorned in robes influenced by Hellenistic art. In places like Dunhuang, caves were carved into cliff faces. Inside them, pigments glowed even in low light. Blues from distant minerals, gold leaf catching flickers of flame. The Silk Road did not merely transport Buddhism unchanged, it transformed it. In Gandhara, near the borders of the ancient Greek-influenced world, Buddha statues took on new form, draped in robes that resembled Roman togas, hair styled in curls reminiscent of Hellenistic sculpture. Faith absorbed aesthetics from trade. As Buddhism entered China, it encountered Confucian structure and Taoist philosophy. Translation became adaptation. Concepts were reframed to align with familiar thought. Nirvana required explanation in new metaphors. Meditation practices adjusted to different cultural rhythms. Religion here was not static. It negotiated. Just as merchants negotiated price, monks negotiated meaning. But Buddhism was not alone on the Silk Road. Nestorian Christianity moved eastward as well. By the 7th century, Christian communities existed in parts of Central Asia and even within Tang China. A stone stele erected in Chang'an recorded the arrival of the luminous religion from the west. The Silk Road allowed faiths to coexist in proximity rarely seen elsewhere. In caravan towns, it was possible to find Buddhist monasteries, Zoroastrian fire temples, Christian churches, and later Islamic mosques within walking distance. Tolerance was not always idealistic. It was practical. Trade demanded stability. Stability required accommodation. Belief, like silk, adapted to survive. At night in an oasis town, you might sit beside a small fire and listen. A monk chants softly in Sanskrit-derived tones. A Zoroastrian trader speaks of sacred flame. A Christian missionary describes a single divine incarnation. You listen not necessarily to convert, but to understand. Because understanding reduces conflict, and conflict disrupts roots. As Islam expands westward and eastward under the Abbasids, it too spreads along trade corridors. Conversion often follows contact, not through force in every instance, but through repeated exposure. Muslim merchants establish trust-based networks across regions. Shared belief simplifies contract. Shared prayer creates community beyond ethnicity. The Silk Road becomes not only economic infrastructure but spiritual conduit. Beliefs layer upon one another. Influence overlaps. Pilgrimage routes intersect with trade routes. Sacred texts travel alongside commercial inventories. And gradually, something subtle occurs. Ideas about the universe begin to converge. Mathematical precision from India, philosophical reasoning from Greece, administrative systems from Persia, paper from China. Religious thought absorbs and responds to each. The Silk Road is no longer merely a line across geography. It is a dialogue, carried by those willing to cross distance not only for wealth, but for meaning. As you lie beneath a desert sky once more, having traveled through cities of light and learning, you realize that the road has changed you. You began as a merchant, you became a witness, and somewhere between sand and stone, you absorbed fragments of belief you did not expect. The Silk Road carries goods. It carries knowledge. But perhaps most enduringly, it carries questions, and those questions will echo across centuries. Not all who traveled the Silk Road carried goods. Some carried questions. In the 7th century, a monk named Zhang left Tang China under circumstances that were not entirely sanctioned. He sought clarity. Buddhist scriptures in China contained inconsistencies. Translations conflicted. Doctrinal interpretations varied. For Xuanzang, and this was not merely academic, it was spiritual dissonance. So he did something extraordinary. He walked west, across the same deserts you have crossed, across the same mountain passes that thin the lungs, not as a merchant seeking profit, but as a pilgrim seeking precision. Travel without trade protection was dangerous. Xuanzang relied at times on caravans for safety. At other moments, he traveled with minimal escort. Accounts describe near-fatal thirst in the desert, encounters with bandits, political complications at frontier posts. But devotion altered perception of risk. Where a merchant calculates margin, a pilgrim calculates meaning. Xuanzang eventually reached India. He studied at Nalanda, one of the great Buddhist universities of the era. There, he encountered philosophical systems more intricate than those circulating in China. He copied manuscripts, debated scholars, absorbed linguistic nuance. And then, after years abroad, he returned east. His caravan was heavy, not with silk, but with texts. Hundreds of manuscripts, bundles of knowledge wrapped carefully for transport. When he arrived back in Chang'an, his journey was celebrated. Imperial support followed. Translation projects expanded. His accounts of foreign lands enriched Chinese understanding of Central and South Asia. The Silk Road, through Xuanzang, became an intellectual bridge in both directions. Faith had traveled west to east. Now, clarification traveled east to west and back again. Pilgrimage, like trade, reshaped landscapes. Monasteries along major routes began hosting more scholars. Translation bureaus formed near urban centers. Scriptures multiplied through copying on paper. Religious travel did not always produce harmony. There were tensions. Doctrinal disagreements hardened into sects. Political authorities sometimes intervened. Conversion could provoke suspicion in tightly structured societies. But the Silk Road's network discouraged total isolation. Beliefs encountered one another repeatedly. Total erasure was difficult. Adaptation was more sustainable. Islam, expanding across Persia and Central Asia, absorbed administrative techniques and philosophical thought encountered along the routes. Sufi mysticism found resonance in certain regions already accustomed to contemplative traditions. Christian communities in Central Asia translated scriptures into local languages. Zoroastrian fire temples coexisted alongside new mosques. The Silk Road did not create universal peace, but it created contact, and contact altered certainty. A trader who had once seen the world in simple binaries, us and them, began to understand multiplicity. A monk who had once known only local practice encountered alternative interpretations. A ruler who had once believed his authority absolute recognized the complexity of distant civilizations. As you imagine Xuanzang crossing the desert, robes dusted in sand, water rationed carefully, you realize that devotion can be as enduring as profit. Perhaps more so, because wealth seeks multiplication, but meaning seeks continuity. When Xuanzang's translation circulated in China, Buddhist doctrine stabilized in new ways. When Islamic scholars translated Greek philosophy, European thinkers centuries later would rediscover lost knowledge. The Silk Road becomes difficult to categorize. It is not merely economic, not merely political, not merely spiritual. It is cumulative. Each caravan adds something. Each pilgrim carries something intangible, and each translation alters the next generation's assumptions. As night settles across an oasis town once more, you notice a quiet exchange beside the well. A merchant hands a monk a small parcel, not goods, paper, a copied sutra, wrapped carefully. Trade and faith intersect again. The Silk Road thrives on movement, but what truly endures is what survives the journey. And beyond belief, beyond knowledge, beyond commerce, there are forces even less visible. Those who rarely appear in official records. Those who manage accounts while caravans depart. Those who negotiate marriages across regions. Those who maintain workshops where silk is woven. In the next chapter, we turn toward them, because the Silk Road was not sustained by emperors and monks alone. It was sustained by the unseen. On Chapter 11, The Unseen Architects. History prefers spectacle. It remembers emperors who command armies, scholars who write treatises, generals who redraw borders. But the Silk Road did not endure for centuries because of spectacle. It endured because of maintenance, because of those who did not leave, because of those who stayed behind. While caravans crossed deserts and mountains, someone remained in the cities and towns along the route. Workshops did not operate themselves. Accounts did not balance automatically. Children did not raise themselves into the next generation of traders and translators. Women, in particular, appear less frequently in official chronicles. But absence from record is not absence from influence. In textile districts of Chang'an, in weaving houses across Central Asia, in merchant compounds of Samarkand and Baghdad, women managed production. Silk cultivation required precision. Silkworms had to be fed mulberry leaves at exact intervals. Cocoons harvested at specific times. Threads reeled carefully to avoid breakage. This was labor-intensive, often organized within domestic spaces. The Silk Road's most iconic commodity was dependent on quiet, repetitive skill. Without that continuity, there would have been no trade. In caravan towns, wives and daughters of merchants often maintained business correspondence while men traveled. Letters carried by returning caravans updated accounts. Credit extended across distance required trust. Trust required records. Women oversaw storage of goods, managed inventories, negotiated local sales when caravans were delayed. In some regions of Central Asia, archaeological evidence suggests that women owned property. Legal documents preserved in dry climates show contracts bearing female names. The Silk Road's economic web was not exclusively male. It was layered. Marriages themselves became strategic instruments of connection. A Sogdian merchant family might arrange unions with families farther west or east. Such marriages extended networks across geography. Kinship became infrastructure. A caravan arriving in a distant city might find lodging not through anonymous negotiation, but through relatives. Cousins by marriage. In-laws who shared financial interest. These bonds stabilized trade beyond formal treaty. You walk through a market courtyard and observe a woman overseeing transactions at a textile stall. She assesses fabric quality with swift precision. Her negotiation style is firm but measured. She knows supply levels. She knows which caravans are delayed. She knows which dyes have arrived recently from Western regions. Her authority is not ceremonial, it is operational. In Baghdad, women participated in scholarly patronage as well. Some funded educational institutions. Others transmitted religious knowledge within domestic settings. The Silk Road's intellectual bloom required literate households. Literate households required education within families. Invisible labor sustains visible achievement. Children growing up in trade cities absorbed multiple languages early. They learned currency values alongside moral instruction. They watched negotiations unfold in courtyards. The next generation of intermediaries was not born in desert crossings. They were raised in stability, raised by those who remained. And then there are those whose names are entirely lost. Artisans who carved caravanserai walls, potters who shaped vessels used in long journeys, cooks who prepared preserved foods durable enough for travel. The Silk Road required constant logistical adaptation. Preserved meats, dried fruits, fermented dairy products suited for long distance. Many of these techniques were refined within domestic spheres. It is tempting to frame the Silk Road as a line drawn across maps. But in truth, it was a network sustained in kitchens, workshops, courtyards, and family ledgers. When caravans departed, they carried the visible output of invisible systems. As night falls in a Central Asian town, you hear the hum of looms continuing beyond sunset. Production does not pause simply because trade routes are dangerous. Stability in one place offsets instability in another. The Silk Road endured invasions, political upheavals, religious shifts, because its foundation was not singular. It was distributed, and distribution is resilient. Tomorrow, we will witness what happens when disruption arrives on a scale that even distributed systems struggle to absorb. But for now, the road rests not on ambition, but on quiet persistence. Power does not always wear armor. Sometimes it pours tea. In cities shaped by the Silk Road, diplomacy did not occur only in courts and treaty halls. It unfolded in homes. A visiting merchant was rarely received first by a ruler. He was received by a household. Meals were shared. Gifts exchanged in modest spaces. Conversation began with family histories before shifting to commerce. In these settings, women often shaped tone long before formal negotiation began. They assessed character, measured trustworthiness, listened for inconsistency. A marriage alliance between merchant families was not sentimental, it was structural. Dowries included textiles, silver, sometimes even trade access. A daughter marrying into a distant caravan network carried more than personal belongings. She carried connection. Through her, correspondence flowed more smoothly. Credit extended more confidently. In Sogdian communities, murals discovered in Central Asian ruins depict banquets where women sit alongside men. They are not peripheral figures. They are participants. This visibility in art reflects lived integration into economic life. In Tang China, elite women sometimes influenced court politics indirectly. Concubines and empresses navigated complex internal hierarchies. Information flowed through informal channels as much as official ones. The Silk Road's stability required more than roads and treaties. It required social lubrication. Conflict avoided in a courtyard prevented disruption on a mountain pass. A merchant insulted at dinner might close an entire corridor. A slight repaired quietly could preserve trade for decades. Women, as hosts, mediators, and managers, often performed this repair work. Invisible, essential. In Baghdad, literate women within scholarly families transmitted religious and intellectual traditions to children. Some were known to have memorized large sections of sacred text. Education began before formal schooling. Language skills developed in domestic environments where multiple dialects were spoken daily. A child raised in such a home might grow into a translator, comfortable navigating layered identities. The Silk Road produced cosmopolitanism not only in markets, but in kitchens. Cuisine itself reflected blending. Spices from India entered Central Asian stews. Noodles traveled westward, while new cooking techniques traveled east. Food softened cultural boundaries. A shared meal created familiarity faster than formal decree. Yet beneath this intricate social web, pressure accumulated slowly. Frontiers remained volatile. Nomadic confederations shifted alliances unpredictably. Regional rulers competed for control of key cities. The Silk Road was resilient, but not immune. Distributed systems absorb small shocks well, but large coordinated force can overwhelm even layered networks. Whispers of rising steppe power begin circulating in caravanserais. Not yet dominant, not yet unified, but organized. Clans consolidating. Leadership emerging with unusual ambition. Merchants discuss these developments cautiously. They have seen nomadic power before. Xiongnu, Turks, various confederations. History along the steppe oscillates. But this time something feels different. Reports describe extraordinary mobility, disciplined cavalry, strategic intelligence gathering. Caravans adjust routes slightly. Precaution, not panic. Women in household compounds hear these rumors too. They calculate risk differently. Inventory management becomes more conservative. Credit extended more carefully. Reserves quietly increased. The Silk Road has survived countless transitions. Empires rise, empires fall, but trade persists until it encounters a force that does not merely tax or redirect, but reconfigure. As night settles over a Central Asian city, a mother instructs her child in multiple scripts by lamplight. She teaches careful handwriting. She teaches calculation. She teaches adaptability. Because adaptability is inheritance along this road. Beyond the mountains, beyond the steppes, a young leader named Temujin is still consolidating alliances. Few in these markets yet understand how profoundly he will alter the network they maintain. But change is approaching. Not gradually this time, decisively. The unseen architects have built a system resilient to fluctuation. Now it will face transformation. Chapter 12. The Mongol Shock. On the steppe, power does not announce itself in marble halls. It gathers in motion. Temujin was not born into certainty. He was born into fragmentation. Clans competed across the Mongolian plateau. Alliances shifted rapidly. Loyalty was transactional and fragile. His early life was marked by instability, abandonment after his father's death, exile, hardship. But the steppe trains memory differently than cities do. It teaches observation, mobility, calculation. Temujin learned early that unity among nomadic tribes was rare, and rarity creates opportunity. Unlike previous confederations that dissolved after leadership disputes, he pursued consolidation systematically. Marriage alliances strengthened position. Military victories absorbed rival groups rather than merely defeating them. Loyalty was reorganized not strictly by lineage, but by merit and reliability. This was radical for steppe politics. Warriors promoted for competence. Command structured in decimal units, tens, hundreds, thousands, flexible, adaptable, scalable. By the early 13th century, Temujin had unified significant portions of the Mongol tribes. He took a new name, Genghis Khan, often translated as Genghis Khan. But what matters more than translation is transformation. His confederation was not merely another steppe coalition. It was engineered for expansion. Mounted archers trained from youth. Horses bred for endurance. Communication systems built on relay riders capable of extraordinary distance. Intelligence gathering prioritized before invasion. The Silk Road had long been shaped by nomadic power, but this time the scale would differ. At first, merchants along Central Asian routes did not fully comprehend the magnitude. Steppe raids were familiar. Cities fortified accordingly. Caravans adjusted routes when necessary. But Mongol campaigns unfolded with unusual coordination. Cities that resisted were destroyed decisively. News traveled faster than armies. Fear preceded arrival. Samarkand, Bukhara, Merv. Names that had thrived as trade hubs felt the shock. Markets emptied, walls breached. In some instances, destruction was total. In others, surrender was accepted. The Mongol strategy was not indiscriminate chaos. It was strategic terror. Resistance carried high cost. Submission promised incorporation. For the Silk Road, this period marked rupture. Trade corridors fractured temporarily. Caravans halted. Households secured goods defensively. The distributed network that had absorbed smaller shocks now faced concentrated force. Yet something unexpected followed initial devastation. After conquest came integration. The Mongols understood the value of trade. They were not city builders in the traditional sense, but they recognized revenue. Taxation of caravans provided steady income. Protection of routes increased efficiency. Under Mongol control, vast stretches of Eurasia fell under a single political umbrella. From China to Eastern Europe. This was unprecedented. Before this moment, trade had required negotiation across multiple empires and intermediaries. Now, one authority, however decentralized, could enforce safe passage across immense distance. The shock destabilized first, but it would soon produce something paradoxical. Stability through dominance. In Central Asian towns, survivors recalibrated. Merchants who had feared annihilation began to notice something strange. Caravans moving under Mongol-issued safe conduct tokens traveled with fewer interruptions. Banditry decreased along certain routes. Local disputes were suppressed decisively. The Mongols imposed order with severity, but order nonetheless. Genghis Khan himself did not design the Silk Road, but his conquests altered its structure more dramatically than any merchant or monk had. A system once layered and negotiated was now overlaid by imperial reach. As night falls over a city recently subdued, a Mongol officer inspects tribute lists. Silk appears again. Silver. Grain. The network is not erased. It is redirected. The Silk Road is entering a new phase, one born from fire, but sustained by calculation. Destruction is loud, but consolidation is quiet. After the first waves of conquest, after cities burned and resistance collapsed, The Mongol Empire began to reorganize the territories it now controlled. What emerged was something few had anticipated: a corridor of relative stability stretching across Eurasia. Historians later called it the Pax Mongolica. It was not peace in the sentimental sense, it was enforced order. Under Mongol authority, a merchant could theoretically travel from the eastern provinces of China to the Mediterranean world without crossing hostile imperial borders. This scale of unified governance was unprecedented. The Mongols did not erase existing administrative systems entirely. They often incorporated local officials, preserved taxation structures, maintained productive cities rather than abandoning them, because empire, once established, required revenue, and revenue required continuity. One of the most remarkable innovations under Mongol rule was the yam system, a vast network of relay stations positioned across long distances. Each station stocked with fresh horses, provisions, and resting quarters. Messengers could travel extraordinary distances rapidly, switching mounts at each point. Information moved with astonishing speed for the era. Orders issued in one region could influence policy thousands of miles away within weeks. The Silk Road, long dependent on fragmented intelligence, now functioned under coordinated communication. Merchants also benefited from the paisa system. Metal tablets issued by Mongol authorities served as safe conduct passes. Bearer of a paisa could demand provisions, assistance, and protection along imperial routes. Abuse of such privilege was punished severely. The message was clear: trade sustains empire. Interference with sanctioned trade invites consequence. Banditry decreased in many controlled regions. Caravans grew larger again. Confidence returned gradually. The paradox of the Mongol period lies here. Initial devastation cleared old political fragmentation. What replaced it was integration at unprecedented scale. Goods began flowing more freely across Eurasia than ever before. Silk moved west in greater volume. Silver moved east. Spices, precious stones, furs, and metals circulated steadily. Even more significant, people moved. Artisans relocated across the empire at imperial request. Scholars transferred between courts. Engineers carried siege technologies from China westward. Gunpowder knowledge began its long migration. Under Mongol coordination, the Silk Road was not merely restored, it intensified. A Venetian merchant named Marco Polo would later travel eastward, reaching the court of Kublai Khan, grandson of Chinggis Khan. His accounts, however embellished, captured European imagination. For the first time, a relatively direct narrative described the wealth and complexity of the Eastern world. Whether every detail was accurate mattered less than the effect. Europe began to envision Asia not as myth, but as reachable. The Mongol Empire inadvertently expanded geographic imagination, but integration carried vulnerability. A network this dense could transmit more than goods, more than knowledge, more than religion. It could transmit disease. Under Pax Mongolica, trade routes linked regions that had once been more isolated. Rodents traveling in cargo, fleas inhabiting grain stores, pathogens moving silently. The same stability that allowed silk and paper to flow would soon allow something darker to travel with equal efficiency. For now, however, in caravanserais stretching from China to Crimea, merchants experienced a rare phenomenon: predictability. Taxes were clear, routes guarded, passports recognized. For a moment in history, Eurasia functioned under a shared umbrella. The Silk Road, once fragile and segmented, felt almost invincible, but density magnifies consequence. And soon, a single outbreak in one corner of the network would ripple across continents. The Mongol shock had unified the road. The next shock would test that unity beyond endurance. Chapter 13. The Invisible Passenger. The Silk Road had never moved so efficiently. Caravans crossed territories under unified authority. Relay stations carried messages across continents. Merchants calculated risk with new confidence. Movement had become easier, predictable, and it was precisely this predictability that made what followed so devastating. Disease had always existed along trade routes. Minor outbreaks, localized fevers, contained by distance and limited contact. But the 14th century presented a different scenario. Somewhere in the vast network stretching across Central Asia, a bacterium traveled quietly. Not in silk bundles deliberately, not in manuscripts, not even in human intention. It moved within fleas. Fleas living on rodents that thrived in caravan environments, grain stores, animal enclosures, urban density. Under Pax Mongolica, goods moved farther, faster, and more frequently than before. So did hosts. In the 1340s, reports emerged from regions near the Black Sea. Merchants spoke of sudden illness in trading hubs, fevers that rose quickly, swollen lymph nodes, darkened skin, mortality that seemed disproportionate. In the port city of Kaffa, on the Crimean coast, a Mongol army laid siege to a Genoese trading outpost. Accounts later claimed that infected bodies were catapulted over city walls. Whether exaggerated or not, what is clear is this. Ships departed Kaffa carrying more than grain and textiles. They carried the invisible passenger. Italian merchant vessels crossed the Mediterranean. Within months, carried wonder. Now it carried warning. 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 Carried wonder. Now it carried warning. It is estimated that between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population perished within a few years. Connectivity had multiplied wealth. It now multiplied consequence. The Silk Road did not create the pathogen, but it created conditions for acceleration. Connectivity amplified consequence. In markets that once bustled with layered languages, silence settled. In caravanserais that once hosted negotiation and laughter, beds lay empty. Urban centers designed for density became incubators. Fear spread alongside fever. Communities sought explanation. Some blamed foreigners. Some blamed divine punishment. Some fled to countryside regions. Flight, however, often carried infection farther. The Mongol Empire itself did not remain untouched. Cities in Persia suffered greatly. Trade slowed dramatically in affected regions. Caravans hesitated. Merchants recalculated routes not for bandits or taxation, but for contagion. The Silk Road, which had unified Eurasia under movement, now revealed its fragility. The same corridors that allowed silk to shimmer in Roman courts allowed plague to darken European cities. Yet even in catastrophe, the network did not disappear entirely. It contracted. It staggered. But it endured. In China, outbreaks occurred as well. In the Islamic world, physicians documented symptoms carefully. Scholars observed patterns of transmission. Mortality reshaped labor markets. Where populations declined sharply, survivors found new leverage. In Europe, shortages of labor destabilized feudal systems. Wages rose gradually. Urban centers reconfigured. Tragedy altered social structure. The Silk Road had transmitted wealth and knowledge for centuries. Now it transmitted consequence. And consequence would change the balance of power permanently. As night falls over a once thriving port, ships remain docked longer than usual. Crew numbers reduced. Cargo left unclaimed. The road still exists. But confidence has thinned. Connectivity has revealed its cost. And as recovery begins slowly, another transformation is already forming. Because when established systems falter, innovation seeks alternate paths. The sea is waiting. The road did not change. The outcome did. Plague does not end abruptly. It recedes unevenly. Some cities recover faster. Others take generations. The Black Death did more than reduce population. It altered confidence. Before the pandemic, the Silk Road had felt invulnerable under Mongol protection. Afterward, it felt exposed. Trade resumed, but cautiously. Caravans grew smaller. Insurance, informal though it was, became more complex. Risk calculations expanded beyond banditry and politics. Disease entered the ledger. At the same time, the Mongol Empire itself began to fragment. Its vast territory, once unified under strong central authority, split into competing khanates. The Golden Horde in the west, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Yuan dynasty in China. Communication across these regions weakened gradually. Succession disputes arose. Local priorities replaced imperial coherence. The Yam postal system deteriorated in reliability. Paisa passports no longer guaranteed universal recognition. Merchants noticed. Predictability decreased. Local rulers imposed new taxes. Regional conflicts interrupted established corridors. The Silk Road did not vanish overnight, but it thinned. Where once a merchant could traverse Eurasia under a shared umbrella, now negotiation multiplied again. Trust had to be rebuilt region by region. Meanwhile, Europe was changing. The demographic collapse had disrupted feudal hierarchies. Labor shortages empowered peasants and artisans. Urban guilds gained leverage. Wealth consolidated differently. Italian maritime republics, Venice and Genoa among them, had already been active participants in Eastern trade, but land routes had proven vulnerable. If disease could travel through caravans, so could disruption. European merchants began reconsidering geography. If access to Asian goods depended on intermediaries across unstable territories, perhaps there was another way. The Mediterranean had long connected Europe to the Near East, but beyond that lay open ocean. For centuries, maritime exploration remained limited by technology and imagination. Now, necessity sharpened both. The desire for spices, silk, and precious commodities did not diminish after the plague. If anything, it intensified. Luxury signaled resilience, status, continuity, but access through traditional overland routes had become less reliable. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 would later complicate land access further, as Ottoman control solidified around key choke points. Long before that decisive moment, European powers were already experimenting with Atlantic navigation. Improved ship design, refined cartography, new navigational instruments. The Silk Road had taught Europe something essential. Asia was wealthy, its goods transformative, its markets desirable. The question became not whether to reach Asia, but how. In the Islamic world, recovery followed its own path. Baghdad's earlier brilliance had already been dimmed by Mongol invasion in 1258. Other cities rose in prominence: Cairo, Damascus, Samarkand. Trade continued in modified patterns, but the seamless continental integration of Pax Mongolica was gone. The Silk Road, once a tightly woven network, now resembled threads pulled apart. Still connected, but looser, less predictable. You imagine a merchant standing at the edge of a Mediterranean port, watching ships prepare to depart westward. He remembers stories of Chang'an, of Baghdad's libraries, of Sogdian middlemen negotiating in caravanserais. The land routes still exist, but something has shifted in imagination. The ocean, once peripheral to Eurasian exchange, begins to feel central. The Silk Road had shaped centuries of connection. It had carried goods, belief, knowledge, disease. It had unified and destabilized. Now it would inspire a new phase of global integration, not across desert and mountain, but across water. As night settles over a quiet caravan route in Central Asia, the bells of camels sound softer than before. Movement continues, but history is turning. The next great artery of connection will not follow sand or stone. It will follow tide. Chapter 14. When the Ocean Rises. For centuries, Eurasia had been connected by land. Our deserts crossed carefully. Mountains navigated slowly. Cities negotiated patiently. The Silk Road had not been a single road, but a memory network stretched across terrain. Now, another possibility emerged: water. The Mediterranean had always been active. But beyond the Strait of Gibraltar lay something Europeans had approached cautiously for generations: the Atlantic. Sailors had hugged coastlines for safety. Navigation relied heavily on sight of land. But incremental innovation altered confidence. The magnetic compass, whose origins traced back to China, allowed orientation beyond immediate shoreline. Astrolabes refined positional calculation. Ship design evolved. The Caravel, with its lateen sails, could tack against wind more efficiently. These were not sudden breakthroughs. They were cumulative improvements. The same logic that once strengthened caravans now strengthened fleets. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 intensified urgency. The Ottoman Empire consolidated control over key eastern Mediterranean routes. Land access to Asian markets did not disappear entirely, but it became more politically constrained. European merchants faced higher costs, more negotiation, more dependence on intermediaries. The desire to bypass these constraints grew steadily. Portugal led early experimentation. Its position along the Atlantic coast made outward navigation practical. Prince Henry the Navigator sponsored exploration along West Africa's coastline, not for curiosity alone, but for access. Gold, spices, direct routes. Step by step, Portuguese sailors pushed farther south, mapping currents, learning wind patterns, adapting to oceanic scale. In 1498, Vasco da Gama reached India by sailing around the Cape of Good Hope. The journey was long and perilous, but it proved something transformative. Asia could be reached by sea. Without crossing Central Asian deserts, without negotiating steppe alliances, without relying on fragmented post-Mongol land corridors. At nearly the same time, Christopher Columbus sailed west under Spanish sponsorship. He sought Asia. He miscalculated distance. He encountered the Americas. Though unintended, his voyage expanded European geographic imagination permanently. The ocean did not erase the Silk Road overnight. Overland trade continued in various forms, but scale began shifting. Ships could carry far greater cargo volume than caravans. Maritime transport reduced reliance on multiple toll points. Coastal ports gained prominence. Venice and Genoa adjusted strategies. Lisbon rose. Soon, Amsterdam would follow. The Silk Road, once the dominant artery of Eurasian exchange, began to lose primacy, not because it failed, but because alternative efficiency emerged. Trade routes are not sentimental, they follow advantage. The ocean offered scale and speed that deserts could not match. Spices that once trickled through layered intermediaries now arrived in bulk shipments. Silver from the Americas flowed into European and eventually Asian markets. Global integration entered a new phase. The Silk Road's golden age dimmed gradually. Caravanserais remained. Mountain passes still crossed, but the center of gravity shifted. If you stand on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic at sunset, watching a fleet depart toward unknown horizon, you can almost feel the transition. The world is widening again, this time not by land, but by tide. When Constantinople fell in 1453, it was not merely a city changing hands, it was a hinge. For over 1,000 years, Constantinople had stood as a bridge between Europe and Asia. Merchants passed through its gates. Goods filtered westward. Information crossed cultural boundaries. But when Ottoman cannons breached its formidable walls, the symbolic center of Eastern Mediterranean trade shifted. Gunpowder, another technology that had traveled slowly westward from China, now reshaped Europe's political geography. Artillery shattered fortifications once believed permanent. The Ottoman Empire consolidated control over strategic corridors. Trade did not cease, but it became more tightly regulated, more expensive, more politically mediated. European merchants increasingly sought autonomy from these choke points. The Portuguese expansion along Africa's coast intensified. After Vasco da Gama reached India, Portuguese fleets established fortified ports across the Indian Ocean: Goa, Malacca, Mozambique. These were not merely trading posts, they were nodes in a maritime network designed to control spice flow directly. The Dutch would follow in the 17th century, building their own vast oceanic commercial empire. Joint stock companies emerged. Early forms of corporate organization capable of financing large expeditions. Ships became floating caravans, except larger, faster. Capable of carrying cargo volumes no desert caravan could match. The Silk Road had depended on distributed negotiation across countless territories. Maritime empires consolidated power into fewer, larger actors. Risk remained: storms, piracy, shipwreck. But the scale of profit altered calculation, and silver mined in the Americas flowed into Europe and then eastward toward Asia. Global trade circuits expanded beyond Eurasia. The world economy widened. Meanwhile, overland trade did not vanish entirely. Central Asian cities persisted. Local networks remained active, but they no longer defined global exchange. The Silk Road's centrality faded into regional importance. It became one network among many. In places once bustling with caravans, traffic thinned gradually. Some caravanserais fell into disrepair. Others adapted to more localized commerce. Deserts did not disappear, mountains did not lower, but the intensity of movement shifted. You imagine standing again in a Central Asian town at dusk. The courtyard is quieter than in previous centuries. A few camels kneel. A handful of merchants negotiate. But the volume feels different. Beyond the horizon, unseen ships cross vast oceans, are reshaping supply chains on a scale unimaginable to earlier traders. The Silk Road had connected continents for centuries. Now, the ocean connected continents more efficiently. And yet, something of the old network endured. Cultural memory, architectural traces, languages enriched by borrowed words, recipes altered by ancient spice flows. Paper still carried thought across regions. Even maritime exploration had been enabled by knowledge transferred along land routes centuries earlier. The Silk Road was not erased. It was absorbed into a larger global system, a prelude, a foundation. As night settles over both caravan town and ocean port, lantern light flickers in two different worlds, one receding, one expanding, but both part of the same human impulse, to connect. The land had once defined the map of exchange. Now water redrew it, and the long silence of the overland road began. Chapter 15. The Long Silence. Empires rarely announce their fading. They simply become less central. After the rise of maritime trade networks, Central Asia did not collapse overnight. Its cities did not vanish instantly beneath sand. But the rhythm changed. Where once caravans arrived in waves, now they came in intervals. Where once markets hummed with layered dialects, now conversations thinned. Samarkand still stood. Bukhara still functioned. Kashgar still linked east and west. But their influence no longer shaped global flow. The Silk Road had become peripheral. Local trade persisted. Regional exchange continued. Nomadic herders still moved across steppe corridors, but the density of intercontinental commerce had shifted to coasts. Caravanserais built for heavy traffic now sheltered fewer travelers. Some were repurposed, others abandoned. Wind reclaimed courtyards. Sand accumulated in unused corners. In these quieter centuries, Central Asia entered a different historical role. Instead of being conduit, it became buffer between Russian expansion from the north and Persian and Ottoman influence from the south, between Qing consolidation in the east and shifting tribal structures in the steppe. The 18th and 19th centuries introduced a new tension. European powers, particularly Russia and Britain, viewed Central Asia not as a trade artery, but as strategic territory. The great game unfolded quietly across deserts once animated by caravans. Spies replaced merchants. Surveyors replaced pilgrims. Maps were redrawn not for trade optimization, but for imperial competition. Yet, even in geopolitical shadow, cultural memory endured. Languages in Central Asia still carried Persian, Turkic, and Chinese influences. Architectural motifs preserved blended aesthetics from earlier centuries. Oral histories remembered caravan journeys in poetic form. In remote oases, elders spoke of ancestors who had once traded silk and spices across unimaginable distance. The Silk Road lingered in story. Even as global commerce now circled oceans, the land retained imprint. In parts of western China, Muslim communities maintained religious practices shaped by centuries of exchange. In Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, urban layouts still reflected caravan-era design. The road was no longer dominant, but it was not erased. It had carved channels into culture itself. As industrialization accelerated in Europe, railways began stretching across continents. Iron tracks would eventually cross Central Asia as well. A new form of land connection emerged, faster than camel, less romantic, more mechanical. But even railways followed logic established by ancient trade routes. Geography had not changed. Mountains still required passes. Deserts still demanded planning. The Silk Road's ghost guided steel. Standing at dusk outside a once busy caravanserai, you might hear only wind. But if you listen carefully, you sense layering. Centuries of footsteps embedded in stone. Negotiations once held beneath these arches. Languages once spoken urgently. Silence is not absence, it is accumulation. Buried beneath sand, manuscripts waited, preserved by silence, waiting to be found. The Silk Road entered its long, quiet phase. Not dramatic, not tragic, just less central. And yet history rarely allows silence to remain permanent. Because connection, once established, has a way of resurfacing. Silence does not erase history, it preserves it. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, European and Russian explorers began turning their attention toward Central Asia once more. Not as merchants, not as conquerors in the old steppe tradition, but as archaeologists. Scholars and adventurers moved across deserts carrying notebooks instead of trade inventories. Among them was Aurel Stein. He traveled through the Taklamakan Desert, following fragments of local rumor about buried cities. What he found astonished the academic world. Ruined settlements emerging from sand, fragments of manuscripts preserved by arid climate, wall paintings hidden in caves for centuries. In Dunhuang, sealed library caves revealed thousands of manuscripts, Buddhist sutras, administrative records, personal letters, documents in multiple languages: Chinese, Sanskrit, Sogdian, Tibetan. The Silk Road, once fading into peripheral memory, returned to scholarly consciousness, not as living artery, but as archive. Other explorers like Paul Pelliot followed similar trails. Competition among European powers extended even into excavation. Artifacts were removed. Manuscripts shipped to distant museums. The rediscovery was both preservation and displacement, but it confirmed something powerful. The Silk Road had not been legend. It had been layered reality. Archaeology reconstructed networks from fragment. Coins found in unexpected regions. Textiles woven in blended styles. Religious iconography carrying hybrid features. A history resurfaced. At the same time, industrialization continued reshaping land routes. Railways expanded into Central Asia under Russian imperial policy. Steel replaced caravan tracks. Goods once carried by camel moved by locomotive. Yet even railway planners followed ancient corridors. The logic of geography remained constant. Deserts still dictated station placement near water sources. Mountain passes still determined track alignment. The Silk Road's skeleton guided modern infrastructure. In Western imagination, the term Silk Road itself gained renewed life. Romanticized, exoticized, portrayed as a golden thread connecting civilizations. Writers and scholars framed it as precursor to globalization. Museums curated exhibitions around it. The road became symbol. Yet, for communities living along its former arteries, life remained practical. Agriculture, local trade, regional politics. The past lingered in architecture and language, but daily survival rarely centered on imperial memory. And still, the idea of Eurasian connection never disappeared completely. Rail lines connected Moscow to Tashkent. Telegraph lines stretched across territories once navigated by caravan. Modernity did not reject connectivity. It accelerated it, but in different directions. The long silence of Central Asia was not absolute. It was transitional, waiting, because the logic that had shaped the Silk Road, geographic inevitability, economic incentive, human curiosity, remained intact. As the 20th century unfolded, new geopolitical rivalries would once again focus attention on this region. Not for silk, not for spice, but for influence, energy, strategic positioning. The old road was quiet, but its corridor remained contested. Standing at dusk in front of a weathered caravanserai wall, you might run your hand across stone worn smooth by centuries of contact. The marks are still there, faint but persistent. History does not vanish. It settles and waits for the next movement. Chapter 16. The Great Game. In the 19th century, Central Asia became important again, not for silk, not for spice, for control. The Russian Empire expanded steadily southward. Railways pushed deeper into steppe territory. Military outposts appeared where caravan towns once thrived. At the same time, the British Empire, dominant in India, looked north with concern. Between them lay vast stretches of land, mountains, deserts, oases. The same corridors that once carried merchants now carried military surveyors. This rivalry became known as the Great Game. It was rarely a direct war. More often, it was intelligence, mapping, diplomatic maneuvering. Russian officers disguised as traders crossed into contested regions. British agents traveled in similar fashion, collecting topographical data. Where earlier centuries had debated silk prices, now they debated borders. Afghanistan became central. Not because it produced luxury goods, but because it sat between empires. Buffer zones replaced trade hubs as strategic priorities. Caravan routes were studied again, this time for troop movement. Mountain passes, once valued for commerce, were analyzed for military vulnerability. The Silk Road's geography did not change, but its function did. Railways reinforced imperial ambition. The Trans-Caspian Railway connected Russian territory deeper into Central Asia. Infrastructure that once supported trade now supported projection of power. Local rulers navigated this tension cautiously. Some aligned with Russia. Others negotiated with Britain. Traditional networks adapted as best they could. Merchants continued operating regionally, but global trade had already shifted to maritime circuits. The Great Game did not revive the Silk Road economically. It revived it strategically. Maps drawn during this period still shape borders today. The modern states of Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, emerged from layers of imperial reorganization. The Silk Road corridor had once connected civilizations voluntarily. Now it was partitioned through imperial calculus. And yet, even amid rivalry, the region's connective potential remained visible. Railways hinted at continental integration. Telegraph lines accelerated communication. steamships linked European ports to Asian markets. The idea of Eurasian connection never truly disappeared. It evolved. In quiet offices in London and St. Petersburg, strategists studied terrain once memorized by caravan leaders. They understood something familiar. Control of corridors means influence over flow. The great game eventually cooled. Empires shifted. Revolutions erupted. The Russian Empire collapsed into the Soviet Union. Britain's colonial dominance receded. But Central Asia remained positioned between larger powers, its geography unchanged, its potential persistent. The Silk Road was no longer an economic artery, but it was not forgotten. It lingered in strategic imagination, waiting for a new interpretation. The great game faded, but control did not. When the Russian Empire collapsed in 1917, its Central Asian territories did not revert to independence in the old caravan sense. They were absorbed into a new framework, the Soviet Union. Under Soviet administration, Central Asia was reorganized into republics. Borders were drawn deliberately, sometimes along ethnic lines, sometimes across them. Railways expanded further. Agricultural projects reshaped landscapes. Trade flowed primarily within a closed ideological bloc rather than across Eurasia. The Silk Road's ancient cosmopolitan fluidity narrowed. Movement across borders became regulated. Ideological boundaries replaced caravan negotiation. For much of the 20th century, the corridor that had once connected continents sat behind controlled frontiers. Its cities industrialized unevenly. Samarkand became a Soviet regional center. Almaty grew under planned development. Yet the memory of layered exchange remained in architecture and language. Markets persisted locally. Cultural synthesis endured quietly. When the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, Central Asia re-emerged as independent states. Suddenly, the corridor between Europe and Asia was politically fragmented once again, but also open to redefinition. Globalization accelerated rapidly during this period. Container shipping dominated maritime trade. Air transport shrank distances further. Digital networks began transcending geography entirely. At first glance, land corridors seemed less relevant. But technology altered calculation again. High-speed rail, energy pipelines, fiber optic cables. The idea of continental connectivity resurfaced in new form. In the early 21st century, China announced a large-scale infrastructure strategy, the Belt and Road Initiative. Rail lines connecting inland Chinese cities to European markets, highways crossing Central Asia, ports constructed across the Indian Ocean. The name evoked memory deliberately. Silk Road, Belt and Road. Ancient corridor, modern logistics. Trains now cross Eurasia in days rather than months. Containers replace camel packs. Customs documentation is digital rather than handwritten. But geography remains consistent. Deserts still require planning. Mountains still dictate engineering solutions. Political stability still shapes corridor efficiency. The Silk Road, as concept, returned. It is strange to think that steel and electricity now follow the same logic as camel caravans. The technology has changed. The instinct has not. Not in the romantic form of caravans, but as strategic infrastructure. Some nations embraced the investment. Others approached cautiously. Global observers debated influence and dependency. Yet, beneath political analysis lay a simple continuity. Eurasia remains connected by land. It always has been. The ocean never fully erased that reality. It only overshadowed it temporarily. Now, rail lines stretch across Kazakhstan toward Europe. Freight moves across borders negotiated through treaties rather than tribal alliance. Energy pipelines carry gas and oil along corridors once walked by merchants. Fiber optic cables transmit data where monks once carried sutras. The Silk Road has not resurrected identically. It has transformed. Its essence, movement across vast interior landmass, remains. As you imagine a modern freight train crossing the steppe at sunset, its headlights cutting across wide horizon, you see continuity layered beneath steel. The same wind moves across grasslands. The same mountains frame passage. The same impulse drives construction, to connect. History does not repeat precisely, but it rhymes. And the corridor that once shimmered with silk now hums with electricity. The great game has ended. Empires have shifted. Ideologies have risen and fallen. Yet the road, in whatever form, continues. Chapter 17. The Quiet Between Worlds. At this point in our journey, the Silk Road no longer feels like a route across geography. It feels like a rhythm, a slow, recurring motion between worlds. When we began, we imagined distance. We imagined sand and silk, empire and spectacle. But what we encountered instead was something more subtle. Movement. Not dramatic, not always heroic, just persistent. A caravan leaving before dawn. Ink drying on paper in a quiet courtyard. A translator pausing over a single word, wondering how to carry meaning across language without losing its shape. The Silk Road was built less by conquest than by continuation. It did not depend on a single empire. It survived them. It did not belong to one religion. It absorbed many. It did not remain fixed. It adjusted. That, more than anything, is what lingers. Adjustment. There is something profoundly human in that. We rarely cross vast distances because we are certain. We cross because we are curious, because something beyond the horizon calls quietly, because staying still eventually feels smaller than stepping forward. If I allow myself one honest reflection, it is this. The Silk Road feels less like a triumph and more like a habit of reaching, of extending a hand into uncertainty, of accepting that the world is larger than our immediate field of vision. It would have been easier at many moments in history to turn inward. After plague, after invasion, after betrayal. Isolation offers the comfort of clarity, but clarity often comes at the cost of growth, and growth has always required contact, not perfect contact, not peaceful contact, but real contact. On the Silk Road, no culture remained untouched. Chinese silk altered Roman desire. Indian numerals reshaped Islamic mathematics. Arabic scholarship preserved Greek thought. Persian artistry colored Buddhist imagery. No exchange was clean. No influence moved in only one direction. Everything blended at the edges. And it is at the edges that civilizations become interesting. Borders in theory divide, but in practice they create meeting points. The Silk Road existed in those meeting points, in the quiet space between languages, in the pause before agreement, in the shared meal after negotiation. The road was not a single line drawn across maps. It was 1,000 small crossings, a bridge here, a mountain pass there, a marketplace where strangers slowly became familiar. And perhaps that is what makes it enduring. Not its scale, not its wealth, but its insistence on the possibility of exchange, even when fragile, even when imperfect. As we move toward the present, it becomes harder to see the Silk Road as something ancient, because its pattern surrounds us. The idea that ideas should travel, that goods should circulate, that cultures should intersect. These assumptions feel normal now, but they are inherited, layered through centuries of risk. When you scroll through information transmitted from across the globe in seconds, you are participating in a velocity version of something much older. When cities hold multiple languages within a single subway car, you are witnessing an echo of caravan cities long vanished. The forms change, the rhythm remains. There is wind again now in imagination. Not harsh, not threatening, just steady. It moves across dunes that once carried footprints, across ruins where voices once argued about price, belief, destiny. Nothing permanent remains of those moments, but their motion does. The Silk Road was never static enough to be preserved perfectly, and perhaps that is fitting. It was meant to be walked, to be crossed, to be altered. If it has taught us anything quietly, it may be this. Civilization grows in the space between differences, not in isolation from them. And that space, that quiet, uncertain, fertile space, is where humanity has always returned. The road does not demand that we romanticize it. It only asks that we notice it, in the adjustments we make, in the languages we borrow, in the ideas we pass forward without always remembering their origin. The Silk Road endures not because it was flawless. It endures because it was unfinished, and in some ways it still is. The night has grown quiet, not empty, just settled. If you listen closely, you can almost hear layers of movement beneath the silence. Not footsteps, not wheels, something softer. A turning of pages, a murmur of distant conversation carried across time. The Silk Road never truly slept. Even when cities fell, even when routes shifted, even when deserts reclaimed abandoned walls, it remained in motion, sometimes visible, sometimes not. Tonight, there is no need to imagine armies or empires, no need to picture caravans under burning sun. Instead, imagine a small lamp in a quiet room, light resting on paper, ink drying slowly, a hand pausing over a word that has traveled across languages before reaching this page. That is the Silk Road, too. Not dramatic, not loud, just the quiet transfer of something from one mind to another. Across distance, across difference, across time. There is something reassuring in that continuity, not because it guarantees peace. History has shown it does not, but because it suggests that isolation has never been humanity's final instinct. We return, again and again, to contact, to exchange, to the uncertain space between what we know and what we do not. If this journey has felt long, it is because it mirrors something ancient. Movement takes time. Understanding takes longer. And yet, both persist. Somewhere, right now, goods are crossing oceans. Data is moving through invisible cables. Languages are blending in cities that did not exist a century ago. The form has changed. The current has not. The road is not behind us. It is beneath us, quietly supporting what feels ordinary. As your thoughts begin to slow, let the images soften. Desert wind without urgency. Mountain passes without danger. Cities at rest beneath evening light. Nothing demanding, nothing urgent. Just the awareness that humanity has always reached outward, and will likely continue to do so. If you choose to walk another road after this one, it will be waiting. They always are. For now, let the lamp dim. Let the page close. The road is still there in the dark. Sleep well.